Does Ben think all the unions say, we want 17 yachts for each one of us, and the boss says once every Monday while we walk in, and then the boss is like, oh no, we can't do that, and then the boss's lawyer who's in the room taps on his shoulder and goes, the government says you can't say no. That's the negotiation. And he's like, no, what are you talking about? So I wanted to watch this interview that Ben Shapiro had with Anna Kasparian. I heard that it was incredibly funny, and I want to give it a little check to see what happened, what they talked about, how it went. Anna Kasparian's a pretty good speaker, and I haven't heard her talk to Ben Shapiro that often, but out of all of the people who are at the Young Turks, she's probably one of the best debaters. So I want to see how it goes over. Because I personally don't think Ben is a very good debater. He only typically does debates in spaces completely controlled by him, which obviously are very easy to control the narrative of, which he's doing it again here, but sometimes people can break through the mold. Let's see what happens.
Stop focusing on scaring people about the scary right-wing candidates and offer them real solutions that you're going to fight for. I think that's the only long-lasting winning strategy for Democrats. Are they going to do it? No, because they're captured by the money.
October 2021 was the first time I met Anna Kasparian for our debate at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce.
Life expectancy in Finland is much higher than the United States.
No, you're correct. Hold on.
It's only 78 years.
No, you're correct. The life expectancy in Finland is longer than the life expectancy in the United States. That's not what I said. I said the life expectancy for Finnish Americans is longer in the United States. That is an apples to apples.
We thought it was a great discussion, and in this episode, Anna and I are picking up where we left off. Many listeners will be aware of Anna from the Young Turks.
Wait, when you say Finnish Americans, does that mean they immigrated, or were they born here and their family is from Finland?
That is the flagship news show from the Young Turks Network.
Debate and hash out some of the ideas that we have and the differences we have. I'm not afraid of my political views. I'm not afraid to admit when maybe I got something wrong in the past and maybe I've evolved on my political views. It's just really, really important in a functioning democracy to have Americans see one another as fellow Americans, as opposed to an identity that needs to be super combative with a different identity. And I think that's what we've kind of turned into. You and I clearly have a lot of disagreements on policy, disagreements on culture, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're an awful person. It doesn't mean that I should be afraid of you. If anything, I should prove that I genuinely believe my political views.
While true, him disagreeing with me does not make him a bad person. He is a bad person, and he also happens to disagree with me.
Actual facts, statistics, empirical evidence, well, that only proves that there's good reason to believe in the policies that I'm promoting. And it's easy to be in an echo chamber where everyone already agrees with you, but you're not really being challenged. So I like to be challenged. I like to put my political ideas to the test, and I think this is a good opportunity to do it.
Yeah, this is one of the things that I really like about you as a person. We actually got to know each other when we did a debate about a year ago, I think, over in Pennsylvania. And
you guys have like a sushi date or something?
And we got along as human beings. And one of the things that's nice about conversations like this is, again, what you say I think is super important, which is that the social fabric of the country is going to be built on the idea that people can have conversations like this, and yet it's considered so unusual and so crazy. Have you gotten any blowback for being willing to do conversations like this one?
I have. I will say, it is a small portion of a very loud group of self-identified leftists on Twitter, for instance. They'll get very upset. They'll accuse me of platforming you, even though, I don't know if they notice, you've got a bit of a platform on your own. I don't need to help you in building a platform or platforming you. I think that there's this very real fear that in engaging in these conversations,
I am actually going to skip forward.
Would call in the industry nutpicking. You try to find people on the other side who say the wildest possible things, or you take them out of context so they sound like they're saying the wildest possible things, and then you critique that in order to drive up ire. And I think all of us do this. I mean, we're all in the media, which means you very often are playing a 20, 30-second clip of somebody. It's not a long-form conversation like this one because they're just different formats, and we all get this. I think the audience also needs to understand that that's the thing that happens. What's more dangerous is when that, I think, carries over into the political sphere, where you have people in each political party who are now attempting to draw and actually incentivize the other party to get more extreme. The idea being, what if we make the other party so extreme that they are unpalatable to the majority of the American people? They elect us, we win, we get to do what we want. Now, that in the short term actually may get them some wins, right? I think this is one of the things that happened in the 2022 election, particularly in the Senate. You saw some Democrats who are actually supporting the most kind of out-of-the-box, crazy Republican candidates like Don Baldock in New Hampshire in the primaries in order to elevate him, thinking, okay, well, that means he's going to lose, which is exactly what happened. It's actually quite smart strategy in the short term, but what it also ends up doing is it ends up fringing out the moderates, meaning like everybody who is not on the fringe is now not represented in the election. And what you've ended up doing is incentivizing the kind of most angry part of one party, and in your own party, making them the most angry that they could possibly be about the other party, as opposed to, what if we all just sort of pick our best candidates and then let them go at it in the ring?
I mean, I wish that was the actual method and strategy, but you would actually have to have a campaign strategy that offers the voters something to vote on, instead of something to vote against. And I think that this has actually been an incredibly dangerous strategy for the Democratic Party, because they might feel super confident that their candidates can beat someone who's on the extreme right, but there have been instances where that wasn't the case. I mean, certainly in 2016, the Democratic National Committee was really propping up Donald Trump under the assumption that there's no way Hillary Clinton would lose to Donald Trump. Well, here we are. I mean, Donald Trump won, clearly. So there's that part of it. I also think when you consider the campaign donations that ordinary people give to the Democratic Party, they were not under the assumption that their hard-earned money was going to go toward far-right candidates in order to, give these Democratic candidates a leg up in their mind. I mean, again, it's very, very risky to do that. I don't think it's a smart strategy at all. For the Democrats, even in the short term, again, it's risky, okay? Sometimes they get it wrong. And if you don't give people something to vote for, meaning if you don't have policy proposals, actual solutions that are appealing to voters, are they going to show up just to vote against the person you've been fear-mongering about? I don't think it's smart at all.
So, I mean, I agree with most of this. I'm not sure about necessarily the trickle-down effect that it's going to make moderates not want to show up or something. It's possible that it could make moderates show up more because they feel like they're going to be drowned out or their party's going to be taken control over by like the insanos, which is definitely possible. I mean, that's what happened that made the Lincoln Project come about, and people like fighting against like Carrie Lake or Herschel Walker, things along those lines. It can happen, absolutely. And it forces like a bunch of moderate Republicans to disavow the more like insano Republicans. So it can happen. So there are some good things that can happen because of it. I don't agree with it, mostly because it's dangerous. Because yes, for one, you're giving like donor money to the worst possible human beings in the country who want to like control the country, and they could also possibly win because a lot of those moderate Republicans don't care about having an insane person be in office, because they can just be like, oh, we'll get it next time. We'll get him next time. Because we've seen just like moderate Republicans be like, yeah, I don't like him, but I'm just gonna like vote for him anyways. So, because these elections are tight, like real tight. So yeah, you're dancing on a tightrope. I called it like a planetary gamble when I covered this, and I still think it's a planetary gamble. You're gambling like the entire planet when it comes to like, because these people think that like climate change initiatives are going to turn us into iguanas and have us eat bugs or something, right? Like it is 100% a planetary gamble. You're gambling the planet, you're gambling, human rights, you're gambling civil rights, you're gambling, basically, women's rights. You're gambling a lot just to get a single win under your belt. And Democrats still don't control the House. So there's still nothing happening. So, I mean, was it worth it? I mean, I don't know. We have some pretty crazy people. I mean, just so you know, to know how bad it can be, Claire McCaskill used to be senior senator from Missouri, tried to do this with like Josh Hawley. And as you can see, Josh Hawley is in Congress and Claire McCaskill is not. She specifically had the DNC and her campaign gave money to Josh Hawley because she thought he would be too crazy to win, but he wasn't. And now he's in office. So, it doesn't always work out as much as you think. And actually, it works out way worse than you may imagine. Now, Claire McCaskill is an MSNBC contributor to tell Democrats how they can win. And Josh Hawley is busy voting to make poor people's lives worse. So,
aside from that, I think what you're saying is also correct in that the conversation increasingly becomes dominated by lunatics. And I don't think that's representative.
It's me.
Of most
I'm
Americans.
the lunatic. I've logged on.
And there's also this problem of lumping in everyone together in like this neat little box of ideology, right? So I think in the minds of a lot of people on the left, you are the exact same person as Tucker Carlson, right? And I think you're different. I think you're different from Matt Walsh. I think you're different from Candace Owens. You guys are all on the same network. I commend you for having differences of opinion on the same network. And I'm sure it can be uncomfortable at times, but there are nuances and differences, and I think it's important for people to be cognizant of that.
I mean,
I don't want to be lumped in with someone on the far left, right? I have significantly different opinions from them on certain matters, and I think it's important
like poor
to know
people.
What those differences are, and not let the extreme.
Anna, well known for being terrible to poor people on.
So one of the things that you mentioned there is the idea that you have to run on something, not run against something. And obviously, negative campaigning is the most effective form of campaigning. Despite all of the happy talk about how when you campaign for things, people rally behind you. People who are policy wonks tend to do very poorly in elections. People who are attack dogs tend to do very well in elections because that lizard part of our brain that senses threat is really activated by a perception of threat on the other side.
Well, actually, can I interrupt you on that?
Sure.
Because I agree and disagree. So let's go back to 2016. Because
What difference
with
is the opinion
2016
of?
several years away, we can now really analyze it for what it was. Donald Trump's campaigning certainly had
I've added on a
significant
convicted child
negative
murderer
component to it.
to
Negative
my
campaigning was part of what he
to
did.
my
But he
contributor
also
team. I love
offered,
differences in
or at least made
opinion.
lip service to something that Americans were concerned about, which was bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, really taking care of workers in our country, maybe reconsidering some of the foreign aid that the federal government shells out. That appealed to his base, so much so that even today they're so loyal to him, regardless of what he does. So he actually did give people something to vote for. Whereas all we got from the Democratic Party during that election was, ooh, Donald Trump's dangerous. Isn't he so dangerous? Oh my God, don't vote for him because if you do, he'd be racist, this, that. It was just nonstop scolding. If that is what your strategy is, I don't think that it's a winning strategy, sometimes in the short term, but certainly not in the long term.
So that does raise the question as to what you think the Democratic Party should run on.
Right.
So the Democratic Party has radically shifted its appeal over the course of the last 15 to 20 years. If you go back to 2004, it was John Edwards running on sort of the Two Americas platform, which sounds a lot like sort of the language that Bernie Sanders uses when he talks about the United States, right? A lot of what he talks about is this sort of class divisions in the United States. It's very much focused on economic redistributionism, focusing on the blue-collar worker. This is obviously the audience that he's attempting to drive out to the polls. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, if you look at it demographically, seems to have become the party largely of upscale white liberals who went to college and low-income minorities. And that's a very fragile coalition because the truth is that I'm not sure that those people have tons and tons in common. White upscale liberals tend to be very concerned with questions of equity far more than people who are actually low-income minorities, like by polling data. The sort of woke concerns that everybody on the right likes to pick on, that is white upper-crust liberals who are pushing that. That is not minorities who are pushing that sort of stuff. I remember having this conversation with Van Jones, and he was, that is white upper-crust liberals. That's a very fragile coalition because the truth is that I'm not sure that those people have tons and tons in common. White upscale liberals tend to be very concerned with questions of equity far more than people who are actually low-income minorities, like by polling data. The sort of woke concerns that everybody on the right likes to pick on, that is white upper-crust liberals who are pushing that. That is not minorities who are pushing that sort of stuff. I remember having this conversation with Van Jones, and he was totally agreeing with me. He's like, what are all these white upper-crust liberals doing talking about this sort of stuff? They should be talking about sort of the bread and butter issues. And so you have the white upper-crust liberals pushing that, plus a solid dose of kind of very social leftist policy ranging from abortion to transgenderism to same-sex marriage and those sorts of policies that are not the chief concern of low-income minorities. And it seems like the way that they're getting low-income minorities to sort of resonate to the message is with the threat assessment of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is racist, they don't like you, they hate you, Donald Trump's evil, and all the rest of that. It seems like they dodged the bullet in 2022, but that's a very fragile coalition.
Well, I see this.
You can say they dodged the bullet in 2022, but then they also dodged the bullet from 2016 to 2018, and then they dodged that bullet again in 2020, and then they dodged the bullet again in 2022. I mean, this is a lot of bullet dodging, unless you're saying that like the Democratic Party is just Neo. I mean, there's a lot of bullet dodging going on here. It seems it's either the coalition is not as fragile as you say that it is, or I guess the Democratic Party is the world's luckiest party to ever exist. You know, and if that's the case, then what's going on in the Republican Party? Like, what's happening there? Because if that's the case, then what's the Republican Party like? Upper class whites and lower class whites, like all together? Is that like that doesn't seem like the world's tightest coalition either, especially since Joe Biden's, like your average Joe Biden donator is what in 2020 was lower income than your average Donald Trump donator. So are Donald Trump fans just like way richer while also trying to appeal to lower class? Like what is it then? You know, what's happening here? And what's binding these people together? What's possibly binding these people together, right? And I wouldn't even necessarily say that it's that like lower class and like poor minorities don't care about social issues or anything. Like one thing that could be tying all these people together, I'm not sure if he's ever thought about it, social issues, like upper class whites and lower class minorities both care about social issues pretty strongly. I know that much. Maybe not the same exact social issues, but they both care about social issues. And you can say that like it's the Democrats' fault, I guess, but what has the Republicans provided them at all besides taking away their benefits and being racist? You know, like what? You know, what do you, if you hate this coalition so much, what are you gonna give them? It seemed like the Republicans' response every single time is nothing. So, you know, I guess complain about it if you want.
This is a problem, honestly, on both sides.
It's sped up by 1.25 times speed.
Campaigning on both sides. I think that increasingly you have both parties completely captured by campaign donations from wealthy donors, corporate donations. I think that's been a problem. that has led to pro-corporate policy by both Democrats and, I mean, Republicans have always been in that camp. But now Democrats have been so captured with that money. And then the other thing is, Ben, it's a huge problem that we have members of Congress invested in individual stocks that they are legislating about or legislating on. Because
True.
First of all,
legal insider trading is pretty cringe.
Number one, conflict of interest. And also, they're going to want their stock portfolios to perform well. So are they going to pass the right legislation to protect the consumer, to protect the worker, to protect the average American when they are literally invested in ensuring that those companies do real well because they profit off of that as well? So that is a huge problem. And so what you have now is both sides, in my opinion, campaigning on a bunch of BS. Okay, not actually focusing on what would improve this country for Americans, what would improve this country for the voters. It's just nonstop distractions. I mean, look, this is what we're seeing right now with the investigations in the House, right? The first thing Republicans said was, we're going to do investigations into Hunter Biden. We're going to investigate this. Fine, do the investigations. I don't really care, right? I'm not some loyalist to the Bidens at all by any means. But the culture war stuff, the investigations, it's really important for Americans to understand none of this stuff at the end of the day is going to improve your life. Okay, so all the distractions, we need to be privy to the fact that they're distractions, and we need to get back to actually hashing out what policies need to pass in order to make sure that Americans are thriving.
While I do think that I guess necessarily the investigations into some investigations just don't do anything, I don't want to push the idea that I feel like sometimes this feels like that investigations into corruption aren't important and nobody should care about it. Investigations into corruption are really important and we shouldn't neglect them. Countries that neglect investigations into corruption are pretty terrible countries. The country just falls apart. The more corruption that's just saddled onto a country, the worse the country just becomes over time. Sure, investigations into a politician did what, a politician said who, sure, no, that won't put food on, that won't feed your kids. But the downstream effect of weeding out corruption where you can find it and where you can is pretty great for companies. Sorry, which pretty great for, well, it's companies too, but it's pretty great for corporations. What the fuck? Sorry, countries. Whoops, sorry. Remember the America's 12 companies in a trench coat pretending to be one. But yeah, I just hate the idea that I feel like sometimes this is giving that, hey, who gives a shit? Because corruption, who cares? Ever heard about healthcare? Sure, yeah, more healthcare would be absolutely amazing. At the same time, we should care about corruption a lot, actually.
So this does raise the question for me of localism versus sort of national policy. So when you point out, for example, that both parties are subject to regulatory capture or that they're subject to their own stock portfolio, some people would say, okay, elect better people. We need to, if we just elect people of this party, it'll fix it. If we elect this guy, he's going to fix it. And then there's the sort of Thomas Sowell position, which is it's not a problem of people, it's a problem of incentive structures.
Yes,
incentive structures in Congress are just broken.
Yep.
And when you have this number of people, 435 people in Congress, who are controlling this amount of money and this amount of regulatory power, that will corrupt, right? I mean, you put that much power at the hands of a very small cadre of people, whether you're talking about in the executive branch, in the regulatory state, whether you're talking about people in the legislative branch, it's innately going to tempt them to enrich themselves and self-serve and self-heal. I mean, this is something that the founders actually were very much focused on, which was the idea the federal government was going to have very little power. And so this does raise the question of how much power you think the federal government ought to have. Because if we're talking about, kind of the solutions that get implemented, I'm a big fan of the idea that California ought to be California and Florida ought to be Florida, and basically that may be the only way that California and Florida can share a nation is if they are allowed to do what they want in their own particular purviews. But because of nationalized social media, and because of the amount of power that's in the federal government, we focus in on the federal government. That means that we care deeply about what happens on the federal level every single day. If you went back 200 years, no one cared who the president was because the president didn't have that much power. So what do you think of the idea of sort of delegating power back down to the states instead of centralizing back up into a central government that does have the capacity to be used?
This is bait, just so you know. This is bait by a conservative to get them to be able to revoke human rights without you being able to say anything about it. This is what it's for. States rights to do what? What are you trying to do with all these rights that you want, partner? Well, what are you trying to do without any federal, or what he's asking for? Because it'll go past some people, which is what this type of speech is for. What he's asking for is to remove all federal oversight over states when it comes to doing things like removing human rights, changing laws, things along these lines. If we kept the whole states' rights thing, then schools would still be segregated and women wouldn't have the right to vote in minimum 5 states. which I think is unacceptable, honestly. So, I mean, sure, I guess we can do that, but also it's just like bait to make you think that the federal government is more corrupt than the federal government is more corrupt than your local government. I can tell you right now, your local government is more corrupt than the federal government is. It just is. I'm sorry. Things are way closer to home. You can do so many things because there's such little oversight. There's such little funding that goes around. You don't have like popular media that's always like, talking to you, and you have way less eyes on you. When was has anybody answer me? Do you know who your mayor is? Do you know who your mayor is? Do you know if your mayor has had any scandals? And even if he has, like, did you like care about it? Did you go like to march about it? Did you like call any of your like local politicians? Do you know who your local politician is? I don't think so. So much stuff goes down locally that you just don't care about because all of those local positions are also political positions. Is your sheriff that's in cahoots with is your sheriff and your judge and your prosecutor who's in cahoots with your like mayor going to prosecute him for like stealing money from the treasury that he like helped fund to get like in office? Is that going to happen? And the connection with the companies that he helps brings into your county to be able to that help pay for his campaign? Like, is that company really going to be investigated by the prosecutor and the sheriff that's like he's in cahoots with to to stop a company that's like stealing your wages? Is that going to happen? I think not. At the very least, at the moment, you know a little bit more about your senator than you do about your mayor. Is that good? No, but like the idea that Cop City, what's going on right now? I can think of in Louisville right now, LMPD and the Louisville mayor's office, and our AG right now, Daniel Cameron, who helped do everything in his power to make sure that the officers who killed Breonna Taylor could like moonwalk away from the whole incident and not be held responsible at all. And get a slap on the wrist at minimum, and even like withheld information from a grand jury to not prosecute them. Like, I'm sorry. No, your local government is not less corrupt than the federal government. It's just not true. In many cases, it's far more corrupt.
Used by both sides for corrupt purposes, for example.
It depends. I mean, I think that, it's funny because I've always been super focused on national politics, but over the last several years, I've been a lot more honestly fascinated with what's happening in California. I think for obvious reasons, local politics is fascinating to me. And in terms of what impacts my day-to-day life, I've realized that these local decisions have more of an impact than what's happening on a federal level. There's a lot of gridlock and a lot of nonsense happening on a federal level. So I think that's part of the reason why it's not coming down to impact our lives on a daily basis. I think the federal government should be tasked with important regulations to protect the consumer because greed is a thing. Okay, the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders is real. And so how do you balance that with the need to protect workers and consumers? I think you need a federal government and a regulatory body to focus on that. When it comes to civil rights, you need that protection on a federal level. You can't just leave it to the states. You don't want one state to say, nah, we're not into interracial marriage. We're going to ban that. Or we don't want to, have equal rights based on or equal rights for everyone. Some races we like more than others. You need a federal government to protect civil rights. But I do agree with you that Americans have not been paying enough attention to what's happening on a local level. There are certain things that can be dealt on a local level that doesn't need to be the responsibility of the federal government. And to be quite honest with you, with all the dysfunction and gridlock with the federal government, I think more and more people are relying on a local level to get policy passed that they desperately need.
So in a second, I want to talk to you about local politics versus national, because I think that the national politics does lead to extraordinary polarization, whereas, as we'll talk about in a moment, when it comes to local politics, everyone gets a lot more moderate when they're talking about their own particular
That's very
community.
True.
First, the debt ceiling is now above $31.4 trillion. Inflation is still well above 7%. People are getting fired at major companies all across America. Well, let's say you wanted to hedge your bets against the future of our economy. The best thing to do would probably be to diversify at least a little bit into precious metals. For over 5,000 years.
Oh my gosh, it's another. Holy crap, every 5 minutes there's an ad. This is crazy. Oh my goodness. It's like, I might as well just watch TV at this point.
Level, and federal politics tends to bring out, I think, the worst in people, mainly because it feels like, okay, for me, I'm a Floridian now, which I'm very happy about. People from New York keep trying to tell me what to do. Why can't they leave me alone, leave my children alone, leave my life alone, leave me alone? If you leave me alone in my community with people who I've chosen to live with, which means that we are going to have much more commonality of interest, we're going to come to a policy that works much better for me and my family than people who live 1,000 miles away and who don't know me, don't know my family, don't care about me.
You can. Also, dude, I'm sorry. The people who live 1 mile away don't know you and don't care about you. At the same time, I'm just the idea that like your neighbor is going to care more about you than like somebody who lives in California is just I don't believe so. And I'm going to tell you now, I think especially if you live in the deep south, I think somebody in California does, at least in just policy proposals, will care, like federal policy proposals will care more about you than your neighbor will. I'm going to tell you this now. They won't like it, but it's absolutely true. I'm sorry, your neighbor, if you live in the deep south, probably doesn't want you to have like free healthcare, free childcare, like these things that like on average, like they're less likely to. A lot of them do, but like on average, are less likely to. And their politicians that they vote in the offices definitely don't. So that's just me. But, you know, I guess on things like the culture war issues and whether or not Hasbro should remove Mr. Potato Head's non-existent penis, I guess maybe they may care about you more there in that case. But outside of that, I don't think so, partner. I'm going to be honest with you. And you can already do that. It's called a local government. It's called a local government. You can talk to your municipality, your county, and your state government. All of those things, you can do that.
And I think that, you know, that return to localism may be the only way forward for the country. I want to talk to you about what's happening in LA. So obviously, I grew up in LA. I spent my entire life in LA until 2 years ago when I picked up my entire family and moved over here. Now my parents live here, my in-laws live here, 2 of my sisters live here. There's been a mad rush to Florida, particularly by people who are sort of the red state mentality. But I don't think it's purely about, like, I needed to be in a conservative area. Again, I lived my entire life only in blue areas, whether it was Los Angeles or Cambridge, Massachusetts when I was in law school. And so the thing that drove me out of California is I think one of the things that you've been picking up on, and getting a lot of flack from your own side for picking up on, and that is that LA has just become a trash heap. I mean, it's been governed awfully. Forget about who's governing it.
Right.
The policies that have been used to govern it are just terrible. You have an increase in crime. Homelessness has taken over the streets. And when I was living there, I've pretty famously talked about this. And it was the kind of place where I had a very nice house in a pretty decent neighborhood, and we had a gate in the front. And we would open the gate, and there would be a homeless person face down in the gutter, Edgar Allan Poe style, or there'd be a guy outside the house shooting heroin into his foot. And I've got like a 5-year-old. And this sort of stuff has become incredibly common in LA. You noticed it, and you've been getting all sorts of flack for it.
Right, because when there are problems in society, we need solutions. And you can't find solutions unless you acknowledge what the problem is and then properly diagnose it. So my biggest issue right now,
well,
at
let's
least
see if she
with
does
the
that.
way the left has handled the discussion on homelessness in places like Los Angeles, is there's this housing first mentality where, oh, everything would be fine as long as we put everyone in housing. And by the way, let me just note, housing is an important component to this. There is a housing crisis. There's a lack of inventory. I think we all know that. We do need to build more housing. But at the same time, treating the homeless population as if it's a monolith has been a complete failure. There is a huge mental health crisis happening in this country. So people with severe mental health issues are just left to die on the streets. And in some cases, you know, because they are experiencing an episode, they could carry out some sort of act of violence and assault someone. And it's a dangerous situation for everyone, okay? The people who are just trying to go about their day and the person who is left on the streets battling with this untreated mental health issue. There are people who are obviously struggling with drug addiction, and you look at the number of overdose deaths, and it has skyrocketed. The approach that we have implemented is clearly not working. More people are dying. And I get so much flack for saying this. I want an actual solution. It is insanely cruel to watch people die on our streets and then give yourself a pat on the back because you think you did something compassionate. That is not compassionate. You know, there's this insanity right now where, let's say we're talking about the same person struggling with a severe mental health issue. They're living on the streets, asking them if they are willing to take the housing that's offered to them. But someone who has a severe mental health issue, I know the left would argue if they engaged in some sort of sexual act with someone, the person who engaged in that act with that person with the mental health issue took advantage because that person with a severe mental health issue does not have the ability to consent. But somehow we're just going to take
POV, you've read too much. You've read too many 14-year-old Marxist Twitter comments. Like, sure. I mean, sure, there's probably like somebody out there who believes that somewhere on planet Earth. I would imagine, yeah. Whether or not this is like a real talking point that like actual people are having who, for one, are old enough to vote, and 2, will vote, and 3, are like talking about policy in any like real way. No, I don't believe that. If I'm going to be completely honest with you, no. And also, sure, like all of these things happen. Like, sure, yeah. Like, sure, yeah, there's a mental health component, but The problem is she's looking at this and saying like, oh, all these things are not working. We have to try something new. We need to give them housing and give them like drug and give them like help when it comes to drugs and give them help when it comes to mental issues. It's not like one problem. It's not one problem. And so there's no one solution to it. And the problem is like a lot of like California's politicians, even though they may have like the little like lapel pin that's like the crossed flags, American flag and gay homo flag, that doesn't mean they're good people. And that doesn't mean that they actually care about trans people or gay people or homeless people for that matter. I think they hate homeless people. If I'm going to be honest with you, especially since most of those politicians are paid for by NIMBYs. Hey, remember that whole like hey, you know, local politics is so based and so cool, and they're way better to have better options for people. No, it won't. I think I love federal politics for bullfoo nowhere sundown town Alabama, and I love federal politics for Los Angeles, California, because both of those local politicians have an incentive to not care about poor people, homeless people, disabled people, or people going through mental struggles, or minorities. All of those people do. Yeah, my property value. Listen, those California homeowners, it's a huge smiling face, incredibly cute puppy when talking about queer people, like monstrous animal looking to rip open your sternum and suck your blood from your still beating heart when talking about homeless people.
Take their word at face value when it comes to housing. No, we need to get that person help. They need help. And I don't care how vicious people think I am for saying that. It's just common sense. It really is. And denying that the problem exists is the other part of this, right? Denying that there was definitely an increase in crime in big cities drives me crazy. I was assaulted in my own neighborhood. I shared the story. I was shocked at the kind of reaction I got from people who I typically agree with politically. Took my dog out for a walk. Two guys who were clearly on something. They appeared to be homeless. Were walking by me or behind me as I was bending over to pick up my dog's mess. One of the guys grabbed me by the hips and started thrusting at me with an erection. And I know that I wasn't raped. I get it. But at the same time,
that's not the standard.
Something like that for a woman who does not have the ability to defend herself in that moment. I had no weapon, no nothing. I have to think about that at least twice a day when I take my dog out for a walk. It is traumatizing. Yes, I've gone to therapy about it. I'm working through it.
But that's not your personal problem. But that's because you were assaulted, yes.
What's making it worse, though, is that I'm the bad guy for sharing the story and saying, hey, we can't just let this kind of stuff happen.
What are you talking about? How does this like wrap into like... My problem is not like talking about this issue because I think she has every right to talk about it and that's a horrible thing that happened to her. My problem is that like wrapping this in for like a political narrative that big blue cities are being obliterated from the inside from like democratic policy or something. Like, what do you want? I mean, like that sucks and everything. What policy does she want to pass to stop that or anything? We already have anti-assault laws. We already have anti-rape laws. We can talk about misogyny. That's true. Like, what do you want to have happen? Double anti-rape laws? Double anti-assault laws? I just don't, I have no clue what her prescription here is.
We need to find real solutions for it.
For what?
It's utter insanity to me that has become a matter of public controversy. And this is why I say that when people in their communities see the problem, there should be broad scale agreement. But you do have a cadre of people who live in a lot of these cities, and I will say in blue cities particularly with crime, who are not affected by crime because they're not living where you live.
Yep.
Which you live in a fine, I mean, where you live, I know that area well. It's where I lived most of my life.
Wait a second. This is the exact opposite. No, those like random Twitter users, like random like middle income poor people who are living in LA, those people are living in the crime. I'm sorry, Anna Kasparian is not living in the crime. No, she's not. You, Ben, it's just two rich people talking to each other about what to do about poor people. I'm sorry. Like, I do not hate Anna. I don't want this to think like I hate Anna. I do disagree with her on some points, but like, here are like two incredibly rich people talking about what to do about poor people. Like, I'm sorry. She's not like in the thick of it. She probably lives in a gated community, or at least near one. And the only gated community that these people who she's now complaining about are living near is called the local correctional center or penitentiary.
An area, but it's not up in the hills, right? I mean, it's not up in Malibu, and it's not at Barbara Streisand's estate where she's got armed guards outside. And so those people who are really spending a lot of money and making policy and deciding on no cash bail and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And
no cash bail does not.
It's an aspect
Why
of
is she
freedom.
nodding?
You have to have the ACLU suit to make sure that the police are not allowed to remove people's stuff from the street because it's an aspect of freedom to be sleeping on the street. And
Base.
like the fact that those people are
What do you want those people to do? Die?
Life, that it becomes a sin for you to mention the consequences of their policy is so dangerous, because how else are you going to adjudicate whether the policy is good or bad if you can't talk about the consequences of the policy?
Well, let me give you another example.
Listen, if anybody questioned me whether or not I said on whether or not Anna has like horrible policy on homelessness, I hope you understand now where I was coming from when I said that, because she does terribly horrible policy. Like ideas when it comes to homelessness. She really does. Yeah. She's like cool everywhere else, but the second you talk about like homeless people living on the street, she's like in the Mojave Desert with you. We don't like your kind round these parts, feller. They need help, but not around me.
This happened recently, and I was really happy.
She's a liberal after all. She is a California liberal after all.
What they're experiencing in California. So members of the NAACP in the Bay Area, and we're talking about the NAACP, they're starting to speak out because they don't feel safe. They don't want their children to walk past, people smoking meth, injecting whatever, taking, fentanyl and all that. They want the city to be a lot more proactive in doing something about this, because they feel that the communities that are overwhelmingly impacted by this happen to be poor minority communities. And that is true. So you can't, on one hand, pretend like you care about these communities, you care about equity, you care about all of this, when the policies that you are promoting and advocating for are making it incredibly difficult for their children to grow up in safe neighborhoods.
What are those policies? Name one.
We're spending in California billions of dollars every year on making the problems worse. Our schools need more funding. I mean, it is insane. What we're seeing right now is insane. I don't care if anyone gets mad at me for saying these things. If you're not living it, if you're not experiencing it, if you're not seeing it, and if you've chosen to ignore members of the NAACP on this issue, then maybe you need to,
What policy? It's just like, I don't know, it's just like a bunch of speaking and saying nothing at all. Like what? She's like, we need solutions. We need real solutions. We need real policy. We need policy. We need solutions. We need solutions. I'm so happy for solutions. You know what? She's talking like, you know what? And I know she won't like this. She's Andrew Yanging. She's forward partying right now. We need real common sense solutions that we can all come together around. What are those? We need real solutions, real ones. I'm talking about solutions, and I'm talking about ones that are real. Super cool solutions, good solutions, great solutions. We need solutions, real ones that brings us together and does not tear us apart. We need solutions. Like, what are you saying? Like, solving homelessness is very difficult. But like, what do you want to do? I just hear a lot of complaining, but like, isn't she the political commentator? Shouldn't she have like some solutions at all?
Reevaluate what your values are.
And one of the things that's happened also with regard to the crime issue in Los Angeles, which again was a significant moving factor in my family leaving the state, was the attempt by politicians and the media to pretend away the problem. It really is a serious issue. And there have been reports, Los Angeles Times reported on this, about the police actively downgrading the level of crimes when they report them. So what used to be a felony is now considered a misdemeanor. What's considered a misdemeanor is no longer considered a crime.
This will blow your mind. In California, domestic violence, for instance, is not considered a felony. And I'm talking about domestic violence, including strangulation, is not considered a felony right now. Child trafficking in California, believe it or not, has been downgraded to a misdemeanor. How does that make any sense? And so a lot of the voters, I think, had the best of intentions. I was one of those voters where I voted for propositions in California that I felt were needed to essentially reform our criminal justice system.
Let's take a look. Let's take a look to see if she's lying. We'll see. Trafficking people is always a felony California law. Okay, well, there's that. If you're convicted of trafficking in order to obtain forced labor services, you faced 5, 8, or 12 years in state prison and a fine up to $500,000. If you convicted trafficking people for a purpose for sex, CP, or extortion, that's 8, 14, or 20 years and up to $500,000, and you have to be on the sex offender registry. Finally, if you pursue a minor and engage in commercial sex acts, you can receive 5 or 12 years or a 15-year sentence to life. If a jury determines that you used force, fear, violence, or the threat of injury against the victim, and a $500,000 fine, and you get put on the sex offender registry. What did she say?
A lot of the voters, I think, had to a felony right now. Domestic violence, trafficking in California, believe it or not, has been downgraded to a felony right now. Child trafficking in California, believe it or not, has been downgraded to a misdemeanor. How does that make any sense? And so a lot of the voters...
Okay. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a lie. Where did she hear that? Where did she read that? Here, let's see. I don't know, maybe I missed something. Let's take a look. Here, I don't know, there was this. This was released in 2018. Let's see. There's this. Let's see if this is anything.
Man's definition of crime considered violent.
A call to action today. Advocates trying to gather signatures for a new ballot measure that gets tough on crime.
In current law, rape by intoxication and rape of an unconscious person and a slew of other crimes are not considered violent in our state.
Women escaping a violent environment
Whoops.
is taking the lead in a coalition of crime victim advocates and law enforcement. They are taking aim at laws that allow the early release of inmates convicted of child trafficking and domestic violence because they are considered non-violent under Prop 47, passed by California voters 4 years ago.
Rapists, child molesters, and other violent criminals should not be released early from prison.
Assemblyman Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Elk Grove, said he joined the coalition because his public safety measures have stalled at the Capitol. Nina Salerno-Besselman joined Keep California Safe to advocate for her friend Jennifer, who was beaten and kidnapped by a boyfriend.
He was convicted, and what was supposed to be a 15-year sentence, because of these laws, she just found out he's now going to be early released.
That's because under Prop 47, many felonies were reclassified as misdemeanors, a curse for some, but a blessing for Tony Hunter, who was convicted previously for petty theft and burglaries. But now she has no felony record, and she's starting to change her life for the better.
Here, let's see. Proposition 47, California. Let's see. Was it repealed? Some people say it was repealed. Effort to repeal Prop 47 fails. Good for her, at least. New bill to repeal Prop 47, lower felony theft threshold from 950 to 400. Let's see. What does Prop 47 actually have in it? California government law. Prop 47 implemented 3 branch changes to felony sentencing laws. First, it reclassifies certain theft and drug possession offenses from felony to misdemeanors. Secondly, it certain drug possession and theft to misdemeanors. Okay. Second, it authorizes defendants currently serving blah, 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 provisions. Third, it authorizes defendants who have been completed sentences and felony convictions reclassified as misdemeanors under the misdemeanors for all purposes. I don't see anything about trafficking here. Has anybody been able to find anything about this when it comes to trafficking? Let's see. So there is on here for KCRA, it says certain crimes such as rape of an unconscious victim and child trafficking are considered non-violent and classified as misdemeanors, not felonies. Okay, so they say this. Do I have any but then how does this like go with what I literally just read, which was that trafficking of any kind is a felony? Are they lying? Is there something I'm missing? What's going on here? Is child trafficking a felony in California? It says it's always a felony, but it's always a felony. Everything I'm looking at says always a felony. Human trafficking, California Law Group. Define human trafficking, penalties for human trafficking. If you're convicted of human trafficking, the penalty may be 12 years or $500,000 or both. However, if you induce a minor into a commercial act, penalty may be a life sentence. Conviction and carries a maximum penalty of 12 years. Defenses: you're wrong about the facts of the situation. You didn't intend to deprive a violation of liberty. You're falsely accused. Pandering, pimping. Where in the world would this be? Possession of CP. Wobbler offenses, meaning a prosecution can charge it either as a felony or misdemeanor, depending upon the unique facts of the case. You're convicted of a felony, or depending on the facts of the case. So what if is it like if you didn't know that it was of like, if you thought that it was like an 18-year-old, it was like a 17-year-old, they'll give you a misdemeanor instead of a felony or something? But where's intended felony, intended to commit a felony, human trafficking, and prohibit, deprive by everything I'm seeing in about like the California Penal Code says that this is a felony. Here, one moment. I found this. Let's see. Frequently asked questions. Okay, I don't know. So this is all about Prop 47. What is the stated purpose? Ensure prison has been focused on violent crime and serious offenses. The date of it was passed in 2014. So it wasn't able to be repealed. So this is still on the books, it seems. Defendants who have completed their sentences for felony convictions that would have qualified for misdemeanors under this provision can apply to be reclassified as misdemeanors, or the offenses specified under the penal code that render someone ineligible for Prop 47. These serious or violent felony, violent sex crimes, assaulting a baby, still assaulting babies, still assaulting babies, still assaulting babies, killing people but with a machine gun this time, killing people but with a nuke this time. They get a super strike. Okay, can I oh my gosh, there's so many. Drug offenses here. Trafficking isn't on here. That renders someone ineligible. The child stuff reclassified because of prior offenses, violent laws. Is that it? I can't. Human trafficking isn't on here. Human isn't on here. Like trafficking isn't on here. All about, and this is from like the California like government, right? Did they miss something? First paragraph? Did I miss something? We're not talking about molestation. We're not talking about assault. We're talking about trafficking. Well, like she just said trafficking. She just said human trafficking, period. Not like specifically like sex trafficking, not Tate trafficking. Persons with one or more prior convictions in the penal code for sex trafficking, for sex offenses that requires registration under the like the sex offender registry are not eligible for new misdemeanor resentencing or reclassification provisions. Stated purpose of the proposition is to ensure and focus on violent crimes and serious offenses, to maximize alternatives for non-serious, non-violent crimes, and to invest in savings guaranteed by the proposition to prevent and support K-12 programs, victim services, mental health, and drug treatment that sentences for people convicted of dangerous crimes like rape, murder, CP are not charged. The proposition states that they shall be liberated, constructed, and if it's this purposes like, and this is updated in 2016, so this is like a new one too, right? Like, I feel like, what do you guys think on do you think, did she lie here? Is this a lie? Is this simply a lie, or have I missed something? She's wrong. I'm not sure if it's lying. I don't know. Everything I've looked at has said lie, repeated misinfo. Yeah, I just, I don't know. If anybody can find anything on this at any point in time, please tell me. Please tell me, because if I look up is human trafficking a felony in California, a conviction of PC 236.1 human trafficking is always a felony punishable by 12 to 20 years in California state prison and for sex offender registry. Give her the benefit of the doubt and think she's repeating misinfo. Sure, that's pretty dangerous misinfo, but okay.
Voters, I think, had the best of intentions. I was one of those voters where I voted for propositions in California that I felt were needed to essentially reform our criminal justice system, because mass incarceration is a problem. You know, there are all sorts of issues in our criminal justice system that need reform. But at the same time, I had no idea that when it came to, let's say, cashless bail or things like that, they were going to downgrade certain felonies to misdemeanors. I had no idea, right? So when that's part of the equation, I think it's important for voters to be fully informed on that, so they're not surprised later. You get what I'm saying?
For sure.
Violent crime is violent crime. Okay.
Do you think people are going to wake up to this? And if so, how does that incentive structure work? So California is essentially a one-party state. Los Angeles is essentially a one-party city. Even if you're a Republican like Rick Caruso, you have to run like a Democrat in order to even get a share of the vote. So what are the alternatives in cities like this? So, I mean, you're obviously someone who disagrees with a lot of your party on some of these issues, or at least the more radical wing of your party on some of these issues. You know, I've always considered myself a conservative, not a Republican. So there are situations where I've said I'm not voting for this candidate because this person does not meet with sort of my minimum standards for who should hold office, or this person is somebody who I did vote for, but now I'm unhappy with them. So how malleable are you with, for example, how you vote in a local election or even a national election?
Well, I mean, I don't know if malleable is the right word. I was very unhappy with local elections in 2022. Didn't feel like there were really a lot of good options. So that was depressing. And you're right in that California has become so blue that like any idea that challenges what the Democratic Party believes there is immediately disregarded. And I think that that's a shame, because even if I disagree with that point of view, I think it's important to have the debate, right? So I actually really enjoyed watching Karen Bass debate Rick Caruso. I thought that it actually forced her to acknowledge some of the weaknesses in her policy proposals and her ideas. And I don't know, I mean, I'm seeing her make some moves that I like. So hopefully she continues in that direction and she improves LA. I'll wait and see what happens before I really give my full judgment on that. But I think the most important thing to do is for media figures to start having their viewers feel comfortable having conversations with people they disagree with, really, because they're not getting the full perspective. If they're relying on left media, they're getting one perspective and they're not hearing from the other side at all. And when they do hear from the other side, they're hearing from the extremes.
I do. So I just generally, I agree with this. At the same time, the Democratic Party is a huge, massive, like, big tent coalition party in and of itself. Like, it's literally split. I think almost exactly third by third, progressive, moderate, and conservative. Like, it's you find a lot of political variation in the Democratic Party depending on where you are and like what's going on. I mean, like, you know, like they're like farming Dems in like Bufu nowhere, like the hills and in the deserts of California, like the great farms, and you got like the NIMBYs, and then you have like the like inner city like millennial and Gen Z progressives and everything. Like there's a lot of people in this singular party. I mean, look at it's the party that literally had its two contestants for 2020 were Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. Is this really like a party that doesn't have a lot of representation of like many sides? Is it really? It's a massive compromise party.
Saying insane lunatic stuff, and they think that that's representative of everyone on the right. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
We'll get to more on that in just 1 second. First, let's say that you are face down.
Another ad? I'm losing it! Oh my gosh! This is crazy. Okay, anyways.
Business calls. Head on over to Pure Talk because we mostly cover national politics. So, you know, when you look at the current state of the parties, it looks like the Democrats are in a state of strength. Obviously, the Republican Party has been in a significant state of disarray for quite a while.
It's funny you say that.
I was about to say, I think that that's actually masking a lot of divisions underneath the surface.
Yes.
You're masking? Don't do that, Ben. Voss just made a video about
right
that.
now, because the Republican Party decided to raid the local homeless shelter for their candidates, the Democrats have been shielded from the consequences of their own bad issue choice and some fairly bad candidates.
Local homeless shelter, nice one. I hate homeless people.
Literally had strokes in the middle of a campaign to a president who does not seem capable of carrying out his office. I'm going to ask you to diagnose the Republican Party in a second and which direction you think that Republican Party is going to go. And then we can get into where we really disagree, because we've been doing too much agreeing so far. But you know, if you're diagnosing the Democratic Party, what's the direction you think the Democratic Party needs to move? And can Joe Biden be the guy who leads them there, or who else is there? Because that seems like kind of a thin bench.
Well, Ben, I think we're going to start disagreeing right away because I think the only winning direction for the Democratic Party is in the direction of FDR. And that's the reason why in the
shut the
beginning
fuck about
of
Fetterman's
Biden's term,
stroke.
His team tried to paint him as like the new FDR, but I mean, he couldn't be further from the truth. I got to be honest, right? Like the good provisions within Build Back Better died. He didn't even fight for them. I don't even think he actually wanted those provisions to pass. I think it was all for show. Look, the most important thing, in my opinion, is to take care of Americans, make sure they're thriving, protect workers, protect consumers. That is my focus. I think people want to live in safe communities, clean communities. I don't think it makes you some crazy rabid right-winger to want that. I think everyone wants that, and they need to be honest about it, right? So for Democrats, stop focusing on scaring people about the scary right-wing candidates and offer them real solutions that you're going to.
I think you should do both.
I think that's
because the right-wing candidates are scary and bad.
For Democrats, are they going to do it? No, because they're captured by the money. There's too many. And you're right. What you said earlier about incentives and disincentives. That's the whole game, Ben. Okay. Trying to decipher whether a politician is a good guy or a bad guy is nonsense. Are the incentives there to ensure that this elected official is actually going to be honest and work on behalf of his or her constituents? That's the real question. And right now, I think all the incentives are in the wrong place.
So what's the number one policy you'd like to see the Democratic Party pursue? You're a legislator now. You've been elected president. What's your first initiative as president of the United States?
I mean, you couldn't do this unilaterally, but I think one of the main policies that would improve a lot of these other issues that we're talking about is healthcare. Single-payer healthcare. Or at least, in the very least, in the short term, just reform healthcare to a point where everyone has the coverage they need to get the care they need. So the untreated mental illnesses that we're seeing on our streets right now, that is a byproduct of a broken healthcare system. I want to fix that. That would be, again, the number one thing I would focus on if I had the power to really make that change.
So, I mean, obviously, I think that we all see the problems with the healthcare system. It's sort of a weird Frankensteinian monster, this sort of private-public monster in which virtually all medical care in the United States is publicly subsidized at some level by Medicare, Medicaid, by hospital reimbursements that are involved with local and state regulation. Though the levels of regulatory thickets and the amount of administration, the administrative cost for healthcare in the United States is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. And, you know, I think that the big problem with healthcare is that everyone, it's such a thicket now that no matter which side you come at it from, you are going to get wrecked for even poking a stick into it, right? The minute you poke a stick at it, ooze comes out. Because if you come at it from my side of the aisle, which is it needs more privatization, we should get rid of the connection between your employment. I mean, if I were coming at this tabula rasa, you get rid of the connection between your employment and your healthcare. It's absurd. Why is your employer paying for your healthcare in the first place, right? You should.
Well, how would people? So look, I agree with you on that. I think a single payer system would do away with the need for employers to provide coverage for their employees. I actually hate the system where if you're working at a place that you might despise and you want to move on, or maybe you want to start your own business, right? You're less willing to do it if your healthcare is reliant on you.
You're literally trapped
there.
there.
I think it's actually stifled a lot of economic growth. I think there would be a lot more small businesses, successful small businesses, if people had that freedom to just walk away, knowing that they wouldn't lose their health coverage as a result. You get what I'm saying?
First of all, I totally agree with you. I think that's why I would prefer to go back to individual and community-based insurance. Right? This is why the lack of social fabric really is a problem, because in my vision of a perfect healthcare world, essentially, because you know your neighbors.
Wait, anarchist healthcare?
You don't want your neighbors to die. Your community helps subsidize your healthcare. But I have very serious doubts about the national community subsidizing healthcare at a large scale, because I don't know that person in New York. I don't know what their habits are. I don't know what incentives they have to engage in the healthcare structure. And you do see a wide variety of sort of models that have been used, right? Singapore is a much more privatized healthcare system than, for example, Great Britain. So there are a bunch of different ways to sort of slice this particular issue.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, because we hear a lot of, I feel like the right wing in America puts words in the mouths of Canadians and people living in Great Britain when it comes to their health insurance, policy, and their nationalized health care. But you talk to them and they seem to love it. So I'll give you an example. So when Boris Johnson was running again for prime minister, what was really interesting is how he kept emphasizing the need to bolster.
Oh, it's a third rail there. You can't touch it.
But it's a third rail because of how much the people living there love.
Oh, you mean like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security? It's a third rail here too?
When you consider the fact that our
crazy
life expectancy in the United States is comparable to that of Cuba's, there's something broken in our system.
Well, so first of all, whenever we get into these sorts of discussions, you have to start looking at apples to apples comparisons in terms of the demographics of the United States, our age, the ethnic composition of the United States, because different ethnicities actually have different health problems disproportionately. You have to look at the poverty rate in different areas. Obviously, the life expectancy in Vermont is significantly higher than life expectancy in, say, Alabama. And so that is a wide gap that is not really attributable necessarily to healthcare quality, because, again, the same national system applies to both Vermont and Alabama. So you have to, the United States is also a country of 340 million people. Cuba is a country of significantly fewer people.
Right.
So, all of these, this is why I sort of object to any attempt to use Norwegian models and apply them to a significantly more diverse, heterogeneous, and large country.
Well, okay, so let me get into that, because if you look at what's worked, because Cuba, obviously incredibly poor country, especially with embargoes and all of that. Donald Trump declared it a state sponsor of terror, which led to other countries feeling very uncomfortable doing any business with Cuba. So its healthcare system is severely under-resourced. But what they've done correctly is they've focused most of their energy on preventative care, because preventative care is less costly than just allowing people to get super sick. At that point, whatever illness they have is a lot more costly to deal with. So they're like, all right, we don't have the resources. We just got to make sure we really hone in on preventative care. That's worked out really well for them. Whereas in the United States, people aren't getting the preventative care they need to prevent severe illnesses because it's so costly, right? So we need to do something.
Well, first we should tell people to stop eating so much. The United States is an extraordinarily fat country. Just by the stats, we're a very fat country. You compare us to Cuba, you compare us to anywhere in Scandinavia. This is a country that has, this is why during COVID, people would say 40% of the population has pre-existing health problems. Meanwhile, Sweden's like, let her rip, man, we're all in great shape. But it's, so again.
Yeah, they have like pre-existing health problems. Man, only if they could have gotten preventative care to stop some of those pre-existing health problems. Oh man, only if people had like maybe some dietitians or anything that could help them out with their diet. Something. Can you imagine what he's talking about right now? Is the benefits of preventative care, and like we can't have preventative care. Look at all these other countries that already prevented their care. Now they don't have issues. What the fuck? What are you talking about? What are you talking about, man?
Comparing apples to oranges is a very difficult thing. When it comes to the NHS or Canada, the only pushback that I give there is that you'd be hard-pressed to find a government-provided universal system of any sort that is widely disparaged by the people who benefit from it. Meaning that if you have no available
You mean like everybody who lives there?
Food stamps like the food stamp system. People who are on welfare like the welfare system. People who get student loans like the student loan system. People who get government-subsidized mortgages like the government-subsidized mortgage system. Once you make people dependent, which is why
I don't think they do.
In the United States, as I say, anytime you poke the status quo from either side, you get penalized, right?
They like
people
having
say,
it.
I hate my healthcare, and then the minute somebody tries to screw with their healthcare, they're like, God, we got to go after them.
I think Medicare is a good example of that. So Social Security.
They're both going to be insolvent, but that's.
I don't think that's necessarily true.
We'll have to raise taxes pretty dramatically, or lower benefits, or lower the retirement age.
No, he's running away with the homogenous country thing.
But I think the cap on Social Security taxes should be lifted entirely.
Oh, no, I'm not. By the way, that is at least an ideologically consistent position.
Yeah.
Meaning that if you are going to say that we need to maintain Social Security as it currently stands, as a defined outcome plan as opposed to a defined contributions plan, then of course you're going to have to raise taxes.
Right.
I mean, like, I'll say that, I have more, it is a more honest argument to say that we want Scandinavian-style welfare systems, so we need Scandinavian-style taxes, than the lie that is currently being pursued by both sides, I will say, that we have to spend exorbitant amounts of money and never pay for it under any circumstances, and then just basically bet that the bill will never come due.
Right.
So if you say raise Social Security tax, I'm like, okay, fine, that's an argument we can make, right? Because what I object to is you'll say raise Social Security taxes to pay for Social Security, and I'll say I don't want that to happen. That's a good debate. What I object to is if I'll say, listen, in order for Social Security to maintain, you're going to have to go to austerity measures. You're going to have to cut the age of retirement because people are living longer. You're going to have to lower. You're going to have to raise taxes, and the person on the other side will say none of that's
No, it's still poison.
Like, no, one of those things has to be true.
But yeah,
right?
but see, that's what I'm talking about. Just going back to our conversation earlier, determining the difference between a good faith or bad faith individual and whether or not you debate with that individual. This is exactly a perfect example.
Oh my goodness, it's just like, oh geez, he's just like, it seems like he's escaped. He's been able to say, oh, we can't have healthcare because they have so many white people and we don't. We just don't have enough white people, so that's why we can't have healthcare. Okay, and all right then. And now he's gone, and I highly doubt she'll ever be able to come back to that, even if she wanted to. Well, that sucks. That's really bad. That's not good. No, having a more homogenous society doesn't make you more likely to have healthcare. It doesn't make any sense. Like different racial groups tend to have different problems. That's true. They tend to, I guess that's true. On like a really small portion of it, a lot of them have different problems because they live in different areas that give them different problems. Yes, I would imagine that the white people living in Montana and white people living in right next to a coal mine in West Virginia both have different problems. One may stem from water, the other one may stem from like lung issues. That's true, but that has nothing to do with like race, and both of them may have problems that need to be helped. I don't know if like the medical industry discriminates based on, oh, we can't give them healthcare, they have this particular healthcare issue. What sense does that make? This doesn't make any sense at all. Sure, black people tend to have more kidney issues and white people tend to have more like skin issue, like skin cancer issues. But like, does that mean that now we can't have healthcare because we have two separate issues? And like, this doesn't even make any sense because like it's the same exact thing in these like Scandinavian countries. It's just not necessarily, they have less, it's less on race because they just have less brown people. But like rich and poor people tend to have different health outcomes. Does that mean that they can't have national health care? Oh wait, it doesn't, because they already do. That's crazy. Who could have seen this coming? It's almost like it's just literally not true. That's crazy. Who could have seen this coming?
One of the things that I've said many times when it comes to economics is that I'm a communist in my own house, and I'm a high-level capitalist when it comes to the greater areas of
what?
Elevation. So the further you get out from my local community, the more capitalistic and free market oriented I am. In my house, I have a joint bank account with my wife. Right? My wife earns significantly less money than I do. It does not matter. It is both.
Communism is when you have a wife.
It's our family earning the money, and our family is communist because we're a family. But I'm not going to be a communist with some rando over in North Dakota. That's not my job. Right? I don't know that person. I love my family more than I love that person. And anybody who tells you they don't love their family more than they love rando is lying to you. It's just not true. And so what that means is that social solidarity has to be the predicate for any policy. And ironically, what's been happening is that as social solidarity breaks down, people want more control at the top level of government to try to create an ersatz social solidarity. And that's not going to happen. It's going to make the problem significantly worse. So if you argue to me in my local religious community, right, my local synagogue where I'm Orthodox, which means that in my community, there's 300 families in our synagogue. We all know each other. We go over to each other's houses. We babysit each other's kids. If you said to us, we're going to have a synagogue-subsidized national health care single-payer program, I'd be like, okay, that's worth arguing about. Like, I'm definitely willing to have that conversation. I know all you people. I trust you people. I trust you're not going to be a free rider on the system and take advantage of the system because I know you. And there are social penalties for you not doing it. Right? If you refuse to engage in the duties of the community, then we cannot have you over for lunch, right? We cannot have you at the synagogue, right? There are certain penalties.
Not lunch.
But you can do that at a small level. As you abstract up the chain.
Do you think people will make that calculation? I'll get literally free healthcare, but Ben won't invite me for lunch. I won't have his raisin noodles, but I get completely free healthcare for the rest of my life. Sound like a win-win, like a win-win-win. I'll take the free healthcare. Yeah, it's just like, I'm sorry, like free riders on the system, you know, they pay in sales taxes. That'll go to that'll trickle up to the, I mean, I'm for trickle up economics. These people, like, they pay. Here's the thing, okay? Here's the thing we need to understand. Most people in the country don't pay taxes, okay? You people, you don't pay taxes, okay? I'm sorry. You don't. I pay taxes, unfortunately. I wish I didn't. But like, you don't pay taxes. You just don't. Like, you get more from your tax refund than you spent in taxes for the entire year. Unless you're like a professional that's making more than like what is it, like 70,000? Is that when you start paying taxes? When you actually start paying like you give the government more than you actually get back in your tax refund? Like Ben and Anna, these guys are paying taxes. Like, most people are not actually paying tax. So like, everybody to Ben would be a freeloader because we're not all multimillionaires off of like talking about how little poor people deserve in the country. You know, that's the difference. I have 74 of these. I might as well just take it. I know you pay the tax. I'm talking about your tax refund. I mean, I guess if you just never collect your tax refund purposefully, then I guess you're paying taxes. But like, if you're making like, what is it, like 60,000 a year or less, you're literally not. You're literally getting more from the government in your tax refund than you're paying in throughout the year in your taxes, which I think is based, because people making that much money probably shouldn't be like giving all their money to the government. They probably need it, and the government probably needs to help them. That's what I think personally, but you know. Oh, this freeloader thing, it just never made any sense to me. I think you just kind of hate people.
It becomes more and more difficult. And one of the things I see, and this happens pretty frequently on both sides of the aisle, is an attempt to take your top-level solution and cram it all the way down in a universalistic fashion. So people will take sort of a democratic socialism that might apply in your local community, and they'll say, okay, well, I want to apply that
democratic
at a national level.
socialism exists, but like only with your cul-de-sac.
You know, I'm a libertarian. I think there should be no internal penalties for any individual decision that you want to make. That's not going to work in your family. It's not going to work in your local community. In other words, the levels of control that you exercise ought to change based on the level of abstraction that we're talking about.
I think that part of the problem is we don't see each other as fellow Americans at all. And we're so divided that, you know, I think you make a valid point in, you know, at least some portion of the country wanting to reject some of these national policies or national programs. They don't see someone living in here. You know what? I'll put it in the context of the left and honestly what my own biases were. And
left like that.
What I used to see the middle of America as and how I've kind of grown away from that. This is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I'm obsessed with that show Yellowstone, specifically because it kind of destroyed my preconceived notions about a huge part of this country, right? So the show, I think, does a good job in tearing down stereotypes about people in Wyoming, definitely, but ranchers.
There are people in Wyoming?
Like you watch that show and you start remembering, oh, wait, yeah, they're Americans. They're like us. They have maybe a different lifestyle.
They're just
but at
like
the end of the day,
me,
they
for
want the exact
real.
same things. I think what's important is to, like, again, bring the temperature down for a second and give Americans accurate information about what the policies would really do, and then allow them to vote on that on their own, right? Instead of trying to sway them in one direction or another. Americans know that healthcare is broken in this country. I think that, you know, there's a lot of, on both sides, certainly. I mean, corporate Democrats and corporate media like MSNBC, they hate Medicare for all. I mean, they've been tearing it down from the beginning. Same with CNN. The question that we heard over and over again when Bernie Sanders was running and promoting Medicare for all was, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Okay, great. They don't ask the same question when it comes to shelling out tens of billions of dollars for a war effort in Ukraine. Like, there is no.
What is this?
Now, look, I happen to think it's important to help Ukraine defend itself because we made security commitments after Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. We were part of those negotiations. I think it's important to keep our promises. But with that said, it is interesting how the corporate media puts its thumb on the scale. They pretend like, oh my God, this is the most costly thing in the world. How are we going to pay for it? But when it comes to other issues, like issues that would enrich defense contractors, there is no conversation about how we're going to pay for it. That's a problem.
I mean, I totally agree that we should always have the conversation about how we're going to pay for it. And I also agree that what is happening in Ukraine, it may be an unpopular position on some parts of the right, but I've been an advocate of funding Ukraine. It seems like the single best defense investment that the United States has made in the recent past for relatively cheap cost.
That's an incredible take by Ben Shapiro. I'm going to be honest with you.
A good thing, globally speaking. With that said, there obviously is a difference in scale between the amount of money that we're spending in Ukraine and the amount of money that would take to do Medicare for all.
Right.
And there are obviously significant drawbacks to Medicare. I mean, if you look at the NHS, for example, there's a recent article in the New York Times talking about the delays in, for example, ambulances, people waiting 12, 24 hours, literally.
He said he's a libertarian. He views helping people as an investment.
Make systems national, you're going to have to, in some way, ration the resources. And then the question becomes, what are the resources? Either you have to increase the resources that you're utilizing, which means increasing taxes or increasing regulations,
right,
or you have to regulate the amount of care that people can receive on the other end. What my personal experience with sort of a Medicare for all system is in Israel, their emergency care is very good. And if you have cancer, you are in serious trouble. And this happens to be what the statistics kind of bear out. The United States has the highest 5-year survival rate for things like breast cancer. If you have a serious disease, people are coming to the United States for surgery, for treatment. If you have a broken arm, you're probably better off in a nationalized healthcare system because it's a fairly simple thing to solve, and it's not going to cost you, quote unquote, anything except indirectly.
But I think it's really important to differentiate the quality of care that is available in the United States, which I agree with you is fantastic.
We have incredible quality. We have incredible healthcare.
When it comes to a family member's
we have the
life,
world's best
healthcare.
You just can't afford it
to pay for the procedures or the treatment that you need, right? People are willing to go into debt because at the end of the day, it's about your life. And I am tired of seeing elderly individuals.
Oh, and I want to make I want to make it clear, I'm not paying taxes because I'm making $70,000 a year or something. I'm paying taxes because I have to, because I'm technically like a freelancer or whatever, and so I have to pay like freelancer taxes. So I owe the government every year, even though I'm making like $1,500 a month or something, which is giga cringe. But anyways.
Retired individuals in this country lose everything, go bankrupt.
File 1040. I have no clue what the hell that is. I'm talking to an accountant this week.
Certainly here, it's where people come to get the treatment they need. But in a lot of cases, Americans go bankrupt for this. I'll give you an example. My mom was diagnosed with.
I've only ever filed a.
She'll be okay with me sharing this because I've talked about it on the show before. She was diagnosed with blood cancer.
No, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
that's real blood cancer. What the hell is blood cancer? I thought, what in the world? That's crazy. That sounds insane. That's like, that's what leukemia is. It's blood cancer. Well, I know emia means blood. I didn't even put two and two together, but that's crazy. That sounds so scary. I'd rather have like a wacky little lump than there be cancer in my blood. Are the blood cells like, are the blood cells themselves like the red blood cells themselves like full of cancer? Like, oops, full of cancer? All of them? Oh, it's the cancer of the blood forming tissue. Oh yeah, you're right. It is blood in they bones. I knew leukemia was like cancer and it had something to do with your bones. I knew the cancer was in your bones, but I didn't know it was the and I know your blood does come from your bones. Blood in they bones. You do have blood in your bones. That's where your blood comes from. That's where your blood comes from. It all spawns. That's where its spawn point is, your bones. That's crazy. Bonitis. Wait, I get to tell this joke because I've had cancer in my family. Oof, ow. Leukemia patients be like, oof, ow, ouch, my bones hurt. Anyways.
And it was really difficult because her bone marrow stopped producing hemoglobin, and we didn't know what was wrong with her before she got diagnosed. She was just very, very weak. She had no color at all. It was terrifying. She had to keep going in to get blood transfusions. Finally, they diagnosed her and they said, look, the good news is there is a medication. You can be on this medication for the rest of your life. It's a chemotherapy medication. It's called Revlimid, but it's monopolized. And even though Revlimid was discovered decades ago, and I think the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, the way patent law works with pharmaceutical drugs, I mean, they found loopholes and they were able to extend the patent, extend it. So there's only one option. And even with insurance, I mean, my mom's older, you know, she's covered and everything. Even with insurance, it's $2,500 out of pocket. Lord. And, you know, I'll do anything to keep my mom alive. You know, we'll contribute to it. Luckily, you know, they found a solution. She's doing great.
Hurt yourself
but
for 5
if you
shards.
don't have the privileges that my family has, if you don't have family members who are making enough money to contribute to help pay for that medication, you are screwed. You're either going to go bankrupt or you're just going to decide, I'm not going to get the medication and I'm just going to end my life that way.
Right.
And I don't want Americans suffering from that. So we need to find a better solution. And so far, from what I've noticed in different models in other countries, that single-payer solution seems to be the best option.
Right. So I would obviously argue that you have to take into account a few different things in a situation like that. One is the cost of development of drugs. Virtually all medical patents happen in the United States, specifically because it is a free market system.
We fund the research and development, though.
Well, I mean, we do, but it's not even close to what the actual medical companies spend on research and development. What the federal government spends on R&D for medical product is so much lower than what Pfizer spends on R&D. And
okay, so here's the thing: it's because we fund the creation of the drugs in the first place, and they fund, we fund the founding research for these drugs, and they fund the wacky ways in which they can make it profitable.
It takes forever for, I mean, the vast majority of these things are washouts. Hundreds of billions of dollars will be spent on drugs.
For pharmaceutical companies?
By pharmaceutical companies that don't go to phase 3.
I mean, they certainly provide quite a bit to their shareholders. So.
Well, I mean, it depends on which ones. You're looking at the ones that actually succeed. I mean, for every pharmaceutical company that succeeds and actually becomes a thing, there are a dozen that fail. I mean, this is just the way that biopharmaceuticals work. I was talking with my friend Vivek Ramaswamy, who founded Roivant Sciences, and this is literally how you used to invest. The idea was that you invest in a bevy of drugs, like a basket, and the vast majority of them will die before phase 3, and a few of them will be successful. How do you make up all the money to pay for all the ones that fail in order to pay for the one that succeeds? So how do you continue to incentivize it? So I think that the questions that we ask.
Yo, it's almost like a free market system doesn't work for this type of product. It's almost like this shouldn't be a product. Crazy. It's crazy how that works.
Right.
Are the same questions. The solutions are different. So how do we continue to incentivize the creation of drugs
and subsidies that they get? It's not simply just
how do we help your mom
like
pay
the
for the
funding.
drugs
It's
once
also the
she
subsidies
gets sick without destroying the incentive.
Making the
3,
drugs in the
how do we
first
actually incentivize doctors to care for your mom with, say, Medicare reimbursement rates that aren't significantly lower than what they can get cash out of pocket, which very often you're seeing doctors in specialized fields just stop taking Medicare entirely because they're operating now across the table. They'll just say, we'll take cash only. This happens in the surgical profession a lot.
Right.
And so there are, I think, systems that are in between what we have and single-payer healthcare that have been significantly more efficient in this respect. Switzerland is one of them. Singapore is another one of them. My argument isn't with restructuring the system. It's how we restructure
Why is everyone talking about Singapore recently?
The simplicity of the NHS comes with significant downstream effects, which is
The one other thing I'll say is, okay, so
they're good.
just quickly on the
Downstream
pharmaceutical
effects are
drugs. I
great.
mean, you will admit, though, right, that when you look at the amount of money Americans are charged for pharmaceutical drugs relative to any other country, we're being price gouged.
Well, we are subsidizing the rest of the world in their price gouging is how I put it.
I mean,
the reason I say that is because we are paying free market prices and they are paying cartelizes. They've cartelized their pricing structure. And so we could, theoretically, bargain negotiate with the drug companies, and then all the patents will get filed elsewhere. That is the other downside.
In the very least, I mean, one of the proposed policy solutions in Build Back Better that was nixed was allowing for Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of Medicare recipients.
Right.
That was squashed. I mean, not entirely. I think there's like a handful of drugs.
No, it's for this reason. It's because the great fear in terms of the incentive structure was if you allow Medicare, which supports a huge percentage of people who are taking these drugs, to negotiate the price, what you're going to do is remove essentially the R&D budgets of a lot of these companies.
I'm not buying that.
Well, I mean,
at all.
the truth is the profit margins in these companies. I mean, take for example Moderna. Moderna had to sink tens of billions of dollars into the development of RNA vaccines, and it was a complete failure until COVID. I mean, like Moderna was essentially bankrupt before COVID happened. And this is unfortunately the way that science very often works, is that it fails and fails and fails and fails until it succeeds. And it costs and costs and costs until it succeeds. And this is, I think, a general point about business that people should understand as a person who is a business person, runs a successful business. For every business that gets...
Yeah, but why do I have to be punished for that? It's all like, why should I be punished for doing that?
Founded and succeeds.
Well, why should I be punished because they doing that?
They missed the 5 businesses that they started before that failed. And literally, for me and my business partner, it was several businesses that we had started before that did not succeed until we hit the one that actually worked. And they don't see the other businesses that started and failed. Most industries are more like the restaurant business than they are like any other.
Well, I mean, look, you're going to start a business and you take a risk. And if you succeed, you succeed. If you fail, you fail. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about Americans funding research and development for these pharmaceutical drugs, I don't think it makes sense for us to then be price gouged by these companies, which, look, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I wish I did. But you look at the profits from these pharmaceutical companies, the amount of money they make profit alone every year, year after year, the amount of money they pay their executives year after year. I don't think you can make the case that the amount that they charge Americans for these drugs makes much sense.
It's just not.
Obviously, we'll have to disagree on that one. It's fun, but we're getting to disagree on that and stuff. So let's talk about some of the other issues. I've had you diagnose the Democratic Party, so now diagnose the Republican Party. We'll get to that in just 1 second. First,
oh my gosh!
Your New Year's resolution. You set out with
it's crazy. Oops, all ads.
Incomplete though. Will make an agreement of industry generally. You're a big fan of labor unions. Obviously, you and I have a wide-scale disagreement on that. I think that they radically raise costs, which is why you've seen so much business move out of the country, and also why you've seen fewer and fewer members of the private sector joining unions. Public sector unions are...
This makes no sense because the rate of companies moving out of the country has increased as the rate of unions has sharply decreased. And the rate of unions in the country has decreased far before the peak of unions leaving the country, have not being in the country is way earlier than companies leaving the States. But okay,
very
whatever,
powerful and robust in the United States. Private sector unions are increasingly not. But so what are sort of the big issues? You look at the Republican Party and you say these guys are just they're out to lunch.
Well, okay, just putting policy aside for a second, it's more about what I'm noticing in terms of, I don't know if fracturing is the right word, but the Republican Party is in a little bit of a pickle, right? Because when it comes to, and tell me if I'm right about this, when you look at Republican voters, it appears that they're certainly attracted to the MAGA type candidates. So they'll do really well in primaries. But then once you get to a general election and the battle is really about those independent voters, those candidates really do struggle. And I think that's what really transpired in the 2022 midterm elections, right? These Trump-endorsed candidates who are further to the right, in my opinion, lunatics. Like, they'll do really well.
They're
but then all of a
crazy.
sudden, they kind of try to tone down their rhetoric to appeal to either moderate Republicans or independent voters in the general election, and it's not really working out for them. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because I think you, just based on what I know about you, based on the conversations we've had, you're more of the, you're just a traditional conservative in my mind, really, right? And so
he is a
I remember
neocon.
you having
That is true.
some analysis post midterm elections that was, you hit the mark on the head, like, or the nail on the head. It was correct in that we need to stop promoting these like far right figures who aren't appealing to a broader electorate. What do you think the solution is going to be? Because I think your analysis is correct on that.
So, I mean, I think that so much of this is attitudinal, meaning candidacies very largely in the primaries have become not about being far right politically. I mean, as you say, I'm a traditional conservative, which means it's hard to outflank me on the right. But when it comes to sort of the attitude that's taken by candidates, that's what's attractive. And that's driven largely by the polarization. I think that inside the Republican Party, there's been a move, which is sort of understandable based on how assaulted people feel by the media in particular, that the more people attack a particular person on the right, the more people on the right rush to that person's defense and say this person is just the best thing since sliced bread. And that is, I think people see that as beginning with Trump, and it really didn't. I mean, I've been here the whole time, and I think that for a
It seemed like a completely illogical way to run a political party. So what he's basically saying here is now your average conservative only cares about owning the libs. Yeah, it seemed like they just want to eat a shit sandwich as long as a liberal can smell it. That's crazy and true.
lot of Republicans that really started mainly with McCain. They sort of move from, I can't believe these people, like John McCain is about as moderate a member of the Republican Party as it's possible to find. And yet suddenly he runs for president and he's the worst person in the entire world. He's garbage. He's terrible. What's going on? And then the Republican Party responds by nominating the most milquetoast human being on planet Earth in 2012, Mitt Romney, who is as inoffensive as dishwater. I mean, he's just, he is just white bread. He's white bread with margarine. I mean, and everybody on the left immediately went to, he's the most scary person. He's forcibly cutting the hair of gay kids in the 50s, and he's the person who straps a dog to the top of his car. And Joe Biden is going to put you all back in chains. Mitt Romney's going to put you all back in chains. What? And so Republicans responded to that. Many conservatives did by like, why aren't we fighting this? We need to fight. Whoever is willing to punch somebody in the face is the person we're going to support. And so that's how you get Trump. And then Trump wins. And so because Trump wins, there's this sort of halo effect that has now accrued.
No, I think he actually appealed to them.
I do think that the solution to that for the Republican Party is to find people who are smarter punchers. I like the punching. I think the punching very often is necessary, right? That's why I like Governor DeSantis in Florida. I think he's intelligent about how he throws punches. I mean, like him or hate him, the guy's much more strategic than Donald Trump.
He also didn't take any of Trump's bait. I mean,
right? No, I mean he's a very strategic thinker. He's somebody who really tries to pick a fight. Right? If somebody tries to pick a fight with him, he's not always going to
destroying the country efficiently.
Slap back. Trump's big thing was you can't hit me without getting hit on any score ever, and that's not DeSantis. So I think that the idea that the Republican Party is not going to be combative in the future is wrong. It is going to be, and it's okay to be combative, but you have to pick the right targets. By the way, the same thing is true on the left. I mean, I think that when you see Democratic candidates, very often there's an attraction to sort of the most wild-eyed because it's like, wow, the right really hates this person. They must be really, really fantastic. I think you see some of this from the squad. But there are definitely counterpunchers in the Democratic Party who know how to punch and are much more strategic in how they go about that.
What in the world?
That is, I think, the future of the Republican Party. That's at least the hope of the Republican Party. If not, what you're going to get is whoever says the wildest thing and draws the most fire is by necessity. What I've said to Republicans is you're essentially letting the left pick your candidates. You're letting the left target the person and then hit them. And the more they hit them, the more you're like, that guy's great. Love that guy. Well, maybe they're hitting him, yeah, because he's on the right. But maybe they're hitting him also because he's a bad candidate and because some of the stuff he's saying is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Herschel Walker was not.
He's a bad candidate.
He was a terrible.
Well, which one is it? Like the Democrats are funding the Democrats are funding the crazy one? Wait, didn't he say earlier that the Democrats are funding like the crazy ones to be put up, but now they're funding but now they're actually hitting back against, like, they're hitting and funding them at the same time, but like Republicans keep voting for them anyways. And also AOC is a House member who only has to appeal to her literal base, her literal like constituency, and that's it. And she's not and she doesn't even have like a high approval rating amongst like the general Democratic Party. It's just, what are you talking about? What are you saying, Ben? This is just
a bad candidate.
Absolutely terrible. I mean, same with Oz, right? I mean, and that's the other thing.
The wizard?
I feel like the quality of candidates has really gone down, and it's really that has accelerated post-Trump, and it's like, I guess anyone can run for Senate now? Like, what's going on? I mean, that is a serious job. We've got 100 senators. It's an important job. You got to be, look, I'm not like some elitist that thinks like, oh, you have to have this decorated record and you've done this and you've done. I like ordinary people representing Americans, but smart people who have actually thought through the policies they're promoting. I feel like you're right. There's a lot of rhetoric going on. I see a lot of that on both sides.
Depending on your position, like some experiences,
where everything is about attacking the other side. Ooh, the other side is so scary. So you have to vote for us because if you don't, the other side's going to win and your life is going to be miserable. And honestly, I don't really notice much of a difference if it's a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of talk. I feel like there's a lot of show going on, but when policies need to be passed, and I think this is partly due to how our institutions are set up as well, nothing really gets done.
Well, so I think that the purpose is that nothing should get done, but I think that the
no. Here's something that I feel like maybe, I don't know, maybe to her or something, since she's like reasonably wealthy, well off, and doesn't have necessarily any like systemic issues besides being woman. No, if Democrats like just were like a part of government and Republicans weren't, and this is something that a lot of people need to get around their head. Like, if only Democrats were in office, the country would be like at least twice as good. There would be a lot of problems that need to be fixed, but that's why us progressives are here. But like, no, that's not true. We'd be functional. We'd be functional as a country, but we would not be perfect in any way, shape, or form. But like the idea that, oh, I mean, I would imagine that, yeah, for her, it wouldn't necessarily matter whether or not like a Democrat or Republican is in office. I highly doubt her life changed that much when Donald Trump was in office. But, you know, for the people who were on Obamacare, like that wasn't very good. That kind of sucked like a lot. Trans people, that sucks a lot. I don't know. Would she not care if like Gavin Newsom wasn't governor of California and it was actually Ron DeSantis or something? I feel like things would be way worse in California, if I'm going to be honest with you.
But when difference, if it's a Democrat, the other side, ooh, the other side is so scary. So you have to vote for us because if you don't, the other side's going to win and your life is going to be miserable.
Sure, I guess.
And honestly, I don't really notice much of a difference if it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of talk. I feel like there's
I would 100% imagine that I would imagine for her, like not much changes depending on the presidency. For a lot of other people, that's just not the case. But, you know, this is what we call privilege talking.
A lot of show going on. But when policies need to be passed, and I think this is partly due to how our institutions are set up as well, nothing really gets done.
Well, so I think that the purpose is that nothing should get done, but I think that the problem is that actually, in spite of that, things continue to grow. So I think we have an increasingly incompetent yet intrusive government, and so that's a bad combo. If you're going to have a government that is very intrusive, it better be damn good at what it does. And it seems like precisely the opposite. All of our institutions are failing to actually perform on the promises that they are promising, and then
also like states were like about to go bankrupt in like when Joe Biden came into office. You know, like there are some real problems in like state budgets going on. Have we forgotten about Trump's handling of COVID so far? I mean, that means people. We may have to wait for like some studies to come out, and I'm not sure if there have been any specific studies on this yet to come out. I may not have just seen them, but I'm quite sure that you can lop off minimum 600,000 deaths if like Donald Trump wasn't in office and like some normie Democrat was during the height of COVID. But okay.
And they promise in response more promises. And then people are like, well, that guy is promising a lot, so probably he'll do the job. It's like, well, maybe no one can do this job, which again, I keep coming back to the localism point, but I really think that it's easier to get things done on a local level than it is on a and it was designed that way. And I'm not sure that that's a bad design. I think we have outsized expectations of what the federal government can do. And what that means is that whoever promises the most and talks the biggest is the person who's likely to do well in national politics. Yuval Levin has made the point that the sort of center-right philosopher at AEI, he made the point that when it comes to Congress, when it comes to the Senate, it used to be that Congress and the Senate, these were institutions that shaped the people who went into them, right? That you became a congressperson, that meant you learned the rules, you learned the ins and the outs, you figured out exactly how policy got made, how the sausage, you cut the deals, you did the stuff in the back room, but then you campaigned on, right? It was an actual thing that shaped who you were. And now, instead of it being institutions shaping the person uses the institution as a platform. So the real reason that you go to the Senate is that eventually you can get a show on MSNBC. The real reason that you go into Congress is that eventually you can get a contributor slot on Fox News. That basically people like you and me who are in the commentary business,
No, it's more like you go into Congress to then get a deal with the lobbyists that you to get like a business deal with a lobbyist who like paid for your campaign, and less about MSNBC and Fox News. He wants to say MSNBC and Fox News because his company are one of like the lobbyists, and the companies that like help pay for the Daily Wire are also the lobbyists that are like helping destroy the country. But whatever, I guess. Listen, he's the good guy, all right. He's the man of the people. China.
Who used to maybe aspire to go into politics. It's now the opposite. People go into politics aspire to go into the business that we are in, actually.
That's so true. And by the way, I find that so disgusting, right? Disgusting both for the media outlets that instead of hiring trained journalists, people who actually want to do unbiased reporting, instead of hiring them, it's like, let's hire, some operative within the Republican Party, someone who's in Biden's administration. I don't think that that's the right way to go. I think the partisan media is becoming more and more ingrained into today's society, and that's leading to more of the divisions that are not conducive to finding solutions that Americans want. But look, to your point about localism and all of that, this is a little bit of an example of what I'm seeing happen on the left that kind of reinforces your point. You go to Scandinavian countries and they don't have a federal minimum wage. What they have is trade unions who negotiate wages based on their workers.
Right.
That's why I want worker power, right? That's why I want workers to be organized. I think it's a far better solution to have labor unions engage in those negotiations and those debates with the employers, as opposed to sitting around and waiting for this insanely corrupt federal government to keep their promises in raising the minimum wage. Minimum wage hasn't been raised.
Trade unions also provide the unemployment benefits, by the way, in Scandinavia.
They do. That's right.
They essentially do the job of what the federal government tries to do here.
One of the major.
True, but then Ben is also against both the unions and the government. So I don't know. I guess his solution is fuck you.
Components or factors in wages stagnating beginning in the 1970s was the decline of labor union membership. So that was the decade when labor unions really started to kind of fall apart to the point where we are today. Now we're starting to see a little more labor militancy. Honestly, that's the only thing that's giving me a little bit of optimism and hope for the future, because I've kind of given up on thinking that the federal government is going to solve these issues that workers have been dealing with for decades now. But to your point, I do think that there are solutions that are outside of the federal government, and it's really about empowering ordinary people. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take organizing. It's going to take putting your cultural differences aside, because that's an issue that the left has as well, in my opinion.
Culture.
Where they want everyone to be pure, everyone to be exactly in line with them ideologically, culturally. Americans are not like that, though. There's a lot of diversity of thought.
I've been on Twitter. They want everybody to be gay and trans. It's true.
We need to meet people where they are.
It's scary.
And not assume that someone who might disagree with you on something is automatically a bad person or a rabid right-winger or whatever they want to, accuse the other of.
And by the way, when it comes to private sector unions, I'm actually not fundamentally on principle against private sector unions, as long as there's freedom of negotiation and as long as people aren't getting kneecapped on the side of the road, right? The idea of collective bargaining, that's been part of negotiations since the beginning of time. There's nothing wrong with a set of workers saying, we wish to come and negotiate for a higher wage. The employer just has to also be able to say no from time to time. Otherwise, start your own company. Yeah. This is why it was
Wait, that's what the negotiate. What? No, you're not allowed to negotiate, because that's what they say. It's not like does Ben think all the unions say we want 17 yachts for each one of us, and the boss to suck our dick once every Monday while we walk in, and then the boss is like, oh no, we can't do that, and then the boss's lawyer who's in the room taps on his shoulder and goes, the government says you can't say no. That's the negotiation. And he's like, no, what are you talking about? What, the boss should just say no to, right to work to right to squirt. Like what, the boss should just say, no, you're not allowed to negotiate, because like, that's what the negotiation is for. Yeah. You say you want one thing, and then the boss says, I don't want you to have that thing. And then you say, okay, well, how about this? And they say, what about that? And then you come to, that's what the negotiation is for. He's like, I'm not against private bargaining. I just hate when you're not allowed to not bargain. What in the world? And also, like, what he's asking for literally happens. Like, a boss is not allowed to tell you can't bargain, but a boss can say that they don't like the rules, that doesn't like the terms in the agreement that you've like brought. That's why strikes happen, Ben. Have you heard of that before?
I remember when last time we talked, we were talking about, the idea of, and Bernie was big on this, the idea of sort of collectivization of ownership of
the means
companies.
of production.
And I said, that's called a stock agreement. That's fine. I mean, if you and your friends want to put together a company and you own the stock in the company and you decide the wages, that's just called the company. Like that's fine. And in fact,
True.
we have some of the biggest sort of collectively owned organizations. I think the biggest one in the world, I believe,
So
is Spain.
true.
Yes, Madrigal.
Yeah,
No
yes.
more.
I think that's right. And they actually engage in hardcore capitalistic competition.
That's right.
And have had to cram down on their own workers. Wage decreases when the market actually undercuts them because ownership is still ownership.
But those are decisions that are democratically made within the organization.
Because it's connected to the people who actually have a stake in the organization.
That's right.
Meaning, and if you choose to take the risk, then you also choose
stakeholders?
to reap the reward.
Correct,
Right?
yeah.
So one of the big problems, obviously, is that when we try to posit sort of labor versus management, what both sides are putting in there, there's an opinion by labor that labor is the sort of labor theory of value. Labor is the only thing that's valuable to the organization. And,
I don't agree with that, but it is a huge, huge revenue. I mean, the revenue is created by the workers, and I think that part of the equation is completely left out of the discussion when you're in America.
Well, again, I mean, I think that part of the revenue is created by the workers. Some is created by the capital risk that was made by the person.
Sure.
Some of it's created by the corporate structure.
Okay.
And this is why, again, I'm not against collective bargaining in a free market system where you're saying, listen, and we do this on an individual level. I think one of the big problems that we've had in terms of collective bargaining is that because it used to be that labor was very striated, it was a lot easier to do collective bargaining because so many jobs now are sort of individualized. This isn't to speak to like fast food workers or something, but you're talking about.
I feel like there's an ad coming up. I'm scared.
For example, or your company, for example.
Yeah,
You
it
have
does-
very specialized jobs. And so the
That's
idea
right.
that you can collectively bargain for very specialized jobs, with very specialized job descriptions.
Amazon's
it's
a
actually
co-op.
incredibly hard to
Every
do that
company's
with
a
any
co-op.
level of actual rationale.
No, I mostly agree with you on that. So, for instance, look, we have a portion of TYT that is unionized. I'm not part of that union because of the specialized nature of the work I do.
Correct.
So these
You
are
couldn't unionize
right.
that.
These are the
That's correct.
graphics artists, the editors. They decided to do it. More power to them. It's worked out, and I'm glad that they did it, and they're happy about it, right? But when I think about labor unions, I'm mostly thinking about major companies like, let's say, Amazon, which you're seeing more and more of these Amazon warehouses either attempt to unionize, or in some cases they've been successful in unionizing. I think it makes sense in that area, especially when you're talking about a company that's so massive that the workers are just kind of, they become numbers, right?
So again, if people are willing to join a union and then go at the company that way, that's fine. My big problem is that I think the National Labor Relations Board is rigged completely
No, I
on behalf.
love.
I'm sure you love the
Yes,
NLRB.
the
I
current
despise the NLRB more
NLRB
than
is fantastic.
the NLRB should be disbanded. It's a garbage organization.
I bet you
disagree
believe
with you
that.
on that wholeheartedly. Listen, the Starbucks stores that tried to unionize, and by the way, many of them, hundreds of them, have succeeded in their union elections, and they have unionized. I mean, the labor crushing strategies that we've seen from the executives at Starbucks have been pretty disgusting. People who have been fired just because they've brought up the topic of organizing the workplace, just all sorts of violations. If it weren't for Biden's relatively labor-friendly NLRB, they'd have no protections at all.
Well, I mean, your protection theoretically is in how good a job you do along with your fellow employees.
Well, I mean,
The
when it
NLRB,
comes-
I have, listen, the
Yeah.
NLRB is the kind of place where I made a joke online at one point that if somebody tried to take editorial control of my show on the basis of unionization, I would fire them. And the NLRB.
They can't, though. I mean, that is a ridiculous thing for anyone to attempt to do.
Well,
Yeah.
of course, the NLRB sent me a missive, and I had to get a lawyer to explain to them that number one, it's a joke, and number two, because
Wait, they actually try to do that?
Oh yes. Oh yes, they did this to
But
Ben
isn't that a
Domenech
free
over at the
speech
Federalism.
issue?
Yeah, it is. It's 100% free speech issue. Number two, editorial control is not implicated by labor contracts. Labor contracts are about wages and hours,
Correct,
right,
yeah.
and working conditions. It's not. You get to unionize at the Daily Wire to decide that you don't like my editorial control. I'm the owner of the company. That's not how that
Right,
works.
right.
So I mean, the regulatory overreach there is really bad. This is not to deny that there are circumstances. You're a coal miner, and all the coal miners in town are being jobbed by the machinery. Of course, you should unionize, right? Norma Ray. Okay, fine. But the idea that the federal government is supposed to cram down on Amazon, that it has to pay people a certain wage when there are other people who are willing to work for below that wage in the same exact town. Like, how is that consensual? Consent seems to need to exist on both sides when it comes to labor relations.
Seems to
Yeah,
be
look,
like a race to the
NLRB's main
bottom.
role is protecting workers who.
I think at the end of the
might
day, we want like a
deal
good
with their
country,
employer raining terror
and a
on
race to the
them
bottom
because
with
they are
with
organizing
wages
the
makes the
workplace.
country
The
worse.
retaliatory strategies that we've seen from companies like Starbucks have been pretty gross. We need to allow people to have those conversations, to organize their workplace without fear of retaliation from their employer, right? So that's the main reason why I think the NLRB is important. The anecdote that you shared about, what happened with you and the editorial control, that is insane. And look, I'm not going to name names, obviously, but we had a similar issue, not with the union, but with employees who didn't like some of the commentary from me or some of the commentary from Jink. That's called sad day for you. If you
Right.
can't handle differences of opinion, then this is not the career path you should go in. That is free speech. And guess what? We're also workers. I'm a worker. I have my rights too. I should be able to speak my mind on the show that I produce and host. But, aside from that, I just think that
I mean, there's some things you literally cannot say.
there is an imbalance of
Oh,
power
fuck you.
right now, and it's because of the fact that labor unions have been dismantled in this country. And workers need those collective bargaining rights in order to have a say, not just in what they're getting paid, but also their workplace conditions. I think the rail workers and what the Democratic-controlled Congress did to the rail workers was pretty gross. I don't know what you felt about that, but
That's true.
rail workers deserve to be able to take a day off, or more than just a day off if they're sick or if they have a family emergency, without being penalized by their employer. And the fact that, during these labor negotiations, they couldn't even secure that, and you had the Biden administration literally put its thumb on the, not literally, put its thumb on the scale to prevent them from striking, I disagree with entirely.
So, I mean, on principle, I'm not in favor of unions being able to bargain for more than they can get. When it comes to the internal turmoil in the Democratic Party having problems
What do you
with
mean
labor unions
bargain
and
for more
CCPs, I admit that.
What does that mean, bargain for more than what they can get? Didn't he? It's so weird, the back and forth. So companies can be like, oh, you're not allowed. For one, you're not allowed to bargain. Two, I can pay you whatever I want. If you don't like it, simply just leave. But if you ever want to ask for more, then then we're getting crazy. Things are getting crazy. It's so weird. It's just like a weird way of the world. Like individuals bargaining based, and then like there's so many like if ands or buts when it comes to like unions bargaining. It just seemed like you just don't actually like unions, which I mean, I guess you can not like, but kind of contradictory to the statement before, like saying that you didn't have a problem with it. It seemed like you have quite a big problem with them, actually.
That I enjoyed it. But it
shows you, but that's the thing, Ben, like it's really important to differentiate between the principled left, right? I'm not just saying leftists,
Right.
the principled left, those who actually want to empower labor, and then the Democrats who pay lip service to labor unions. And that is why you are seeing working people start to realign their political ideology, unfortunately, in some cases with the right, because they will hear someone like Trump pay lip service to workers, even though talk is cheap. He didn't actually follow through with a lot of what he said. But just acknowledging those issues that workers have been dealing with made Trump super appealing to them.
Well, I think in the future, one of the places where there will actually be bipartisan agreement is, I think indirectly, it will have serious effects on labor, but the sort of willingness now to face up to the threat that China represents is going to have some pretty dramatic impacts on reshaping supply chains, on reshaping how manufacturing and labor work, particularly in the United States. I think a lot of the outsourcing that has gone to China is going to be reshored in fairly short order, given the fact that both parties are now realizing what a threat China represents.
Well, look, and aside from China being an adversary and all of that, and I'm a little uneasy with some of the rhetoric that I'm seeing, and it seems like an area where Democrats and Republicans are united. The rhetoric, I don't want it to lead toward an actual like war with China, and I feel like Biden has been irresponsible with some of the things he said, like, oh, if China invades Taiwan, we'll have boots on the ground. Don't say stuff like that. That's incredibly stupid. But in terms of like the manufacturing issues, the supply chain
don't defend
issues,
Taiwan.
I'm very happy to see that politicians are finally waking up to the fact that we need to manufacture things in the United States. I mean, this is one of the failures of, Venezuela's policies. They stopped manufacturing things, started.
I mean, like I'm not for like throwing trying to wave our military caca around whenever we have the opportunity to, but like what's the point of us having like military agreements if we just kind of go meh, fuck you whenever like a military issue comes up, you know what I mean? Like it's not even like a Ukraine situation. We're way closer allies with Taiwan than we are with China, but it's just like I don't know, give them money and say good luck, see you later, dumbass. Hope you win. I don't think we should
importing
do that.
Everything. And once oil prices went down, and oil, of course, is like their number one commodity and export, they were screwed, right? So we experienced how insanely fragile our supply chains are. We need to manufacture jobs here in the United States, or manufacture products and bring jobs back here to the United States. I like that we're headed in that direction to some extent. The CHIPS Act is a good example of that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I think there's certain specified industries, chips are obviously one of them,
right,
where they actually implicate national security. And so you are going to see some right-left coalitions that are sort of odd when it comes to reshoring, that sort of stuff.
Same with pharmaceutical drugs, by the way.
That's true. Yep. Any stuff that has been manufactured in China heretofore and that seriously impacts national security is going to be reshored. Much of it's not going to be reshored in the United States, by the way. A lot of it's going to end up in Vietnam. Some of it's going to end up in Thailand. You're going to Mexico. You're going to see a lot of this stuff go to other places on the globe. And the sort of countervailing point to the we need to reshore everything is that autarky has essentially been a giant failed economic strategy wherever it's been tried. The idea of all manufacturing happens in our country. All products must be produced from within. That generates economic failure. I mean, one of the reasons that Venezuela has failed is specifically because it is essentially economically isolated and self-isolated. I mean, they nationalized virtually all of their industry, and they prevented people from being able to own even within their country. I mean, there's foreign direct investment basically dried up. There's no money going into Venezuela. I mean, there's half of the story that's been told when it comes to the American economy about stagnating wages. The other half that has not been told is that what you get for your wages now is way better than what you got in 1980. I mean, that is just a reality. You would not wish to live in 1980. As opposed to now. You now have a refrigerator, you have a microwave, you have two cars, you have a...
Sure, okay, so if you want to talk about the technological advances...
Well, I mean, the stuff that you have for your money. aside from two specifically
But there's a
government-subsidized
lot of
areas,
crap,
healthcare and
Ben.
education.
There's a lot of crap. Okay, so look, honestly,
Would you rather live in 1980? Like that standard of living?
in terms of the quality of
Here, one second. So here's this. All right. So this is GDP per capita is the blue line, and median household income is the red line. And so this only goes up to 2011, but this is some data. This is 1980 here at like 100. So this is like the only 80s data that we have, 1989. And it was technically, by definition, when it comes to median household income, you did have a higher standard of living back in 1980 than you did 1989 than people did in 2010, late 2010. History of standard of living in the United States. Oh my goodness. There's some of these I found that article, which was in 2011, and the last article that I found was from 1998. Why are these articles so old? Standard of living. And also, hasn't home ownership in the US gone down? We'll take a look. We can have a Shamal looky home ownership rate. The home ownership rate at the moment in 1980. In 1980, it was 65%. At the moment, in the last recorded Q4 2022, it was 65%. Okay, as you can see here, it hasn't changed much at all. As you can see here, 65.8%, and now it's 65.9%. Even though we have way more people in the country, we did it. Technically, he is right. That was the peak in 1980. So technically, he is right that we do have better home ownership now than we did in the 1980s. I guess I'll give it to him. What do you guys think, chat? Should we give it to him? Should we give him this W? It is a W after all. It doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. I guess, even though we have way more people in the country now, the home ownership has, I guess, increased technically. Not statistically reasonable. What would that even be? Good job, Ben. America, huge W. Good job, Ben.
products that Americans could buy, I want to go back to the 1950s. Okay, I'm literally.
He was right there. They still were driving those cars.
I stopped.
I personally would not like to go back to the 1950s. I'd just like to have that said now.
Completely stopped buying new clothes. Everything I buy now is vintage, made by American garment workers in the 1950s. And those garments, by the way, look like they're brand new. Brand new. Quality. Like what we did.
But the percentage of salary that you would have to spend on that is much
higher.
That's true.
That's true. So
for the worker, you're not shopping vintage shops in the 50s. You're going to H&M.
So, okay, but understand. So
what would vintage shops be
with,
in the 1950s?
This was what
1920s looks?
We started offshoring jobs and really focused on consumerism, right? So wages started to become stagnant, but Americans were okay.
Why not? I have
because
my
they
reasons.
can rely on cheap products that are made in other countries through exploited labor, right? So we have a bunch of cheap crap we can buy, sure. But the quality of the stuff we're buying is not there. We have to replace it after. I mean, look at clothing in particular. You buy clothes in America that, by the way, were made in some other country,
China
or whatever.
Pakistan.
The next day.
I mean, that's true, but the percentage of your salary every year that you're spending on clothing is way lower than it was in 1980. And when you talk about sort of the economic narrative of the 70s, there's a countervailing point of view, which is that heavy unionization, high labor costs in the 50s and 60s, and a time where literally the rest of the world was physically destroyed by World War II, gave us a head start, which we then blew over the course of the next few decades, to the point by the 1970s, we have a decade of economic stagnation with literally no stock growth from essentially 1963 all the way up till the early to mid-1980s. You have 20 years where your stocks don't actually appreciate in any serious way because the economy basically stops dead. We're getting outcompeted. The American car companies, which are the crown jewel of American industry, are getting outcompeted by Toyota and Hyundai. And by the 1970s, 1980s, we're importing all of those cars.
They were just making better cars.
To them, it's because we didn't offshore them. It's
no,
because
we totally did offshore. Maybe not to Asian countries. We offshored a lot. I mean, think about the Rust Belt, right? And all the manufacturing jobs that went to Mexico.
The offshoring happened later. That offshoring happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Correct.
That was an aspect of attempting to compete with the import of cars from other countries. I mean, Toyota becomes a world power in terms of being an actual global corporation because our manufacturing costs in the United States are too high. We're living fat and happy off the excesses of the rest of the world being destroyed, essentially.
I don't think this is true. I think I've looked into this before, and it was actually they were making simply better cars.
Japan rises from the ashes.
I mean, like your average Toyota. Your Toyota Corolla lasted you could like pass that down to your kids.
You actually start restricting imports and you generate.
You could not necessarily do that with your Ford as often.
Or you have to start offshoring and competing and lowering the wages. And so that's essentially what happened.
I would go on the tariff route for sure.
So right. So, I mean,
100%.
and by the way, so Trump, right? I mean, this is sort of that right-left horseshoe that's been happening. Obviously, I wouldn't, because if you just, again, I will go back to my original point. I don't think that you'd be willing to have many takers who would be willing to go back to 1980s level standard of living from 2022. We have for as much as we can talk about the excesses of Amazon, we now.
The saddest thing is, it seems like it hasn't changed that much.
You can hit a button, and any product on earth will arrive at your door in 2 days.
That's true. And look, that's part of consumerism, and it would certainly be a culture shock for Americans
consuming.
to rethink whether or not they need all of the stuff that's made in other countries.
So that's the honest trade-off.
Yeah,
and I appreciate the honest trade-off.
No, and I am being honest. And look, I acknowledge
my Funko Pops.
People might not agree with me, but
my Funko Pops can get here in 2-day delivery, and my Amazon driver only had to shit in 2 bags and piss in 3 bottles to make it happen. Let's go.
Entire neighborhoods of single-family homes that typically would be purchased.
Anybody
by
up being single in a family home?
The Federal Reserve is expending extraordinary resources, and their easy money policies over the course of the last 2 decades have been an absolute disaster.
Definitely.
Man, that sounds like a great joke. I just thought about that. Can you imagine the stand-up comic who was like, back in my parents' day, we used to have so many single-family homes. Nowadays, everybody's single, living in their family home. Hey!
American economy.
And quantitative easing, honestly, started under the Obama administration. So the fury that middle America feels toward Democrats like Obama, I get it. Because after you just got foreclosed on, after all of that heartache that your family experienced in the 2008 economic crash, you see the banks, you see Wall Street, you see the same individuals literally exploit that crisis to become even wealthier.
Right, and here's where I think this has always been sort of the fascinating divide when it came to, for example, the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. So my question always with Occupy Wall Street, which is making some of the same points you're making, is why are you occupying Wall Street? Why aren't you occupying K Street? Like, you should be in Washington. I don't understand why you're going after the people. Again, speaking of incentive structures, the people in Wall Street are acting based on
the people in Wall Street need to be regulated, but like if they didn't need to be regulated, it'd be great.
The Federal Reserve. One of those things is a thing where you have stock in it. It's called your vote. And one of those things is a place you do not have stock in it, and that's called Wall Street, unless you actually have stock in the company, in which case you go to the shareholder meeting. So it seems to me that the focus should be placed on the origin of the public policy. If you and I can agree that the Federal Reserve should stop pumping money into the economy, and this will naturally lower the amount of...
I think it's the fault of the bad people doing bad things and the people who didn't stop them.
Single-family homes in Houston, for example. Then I think we actually hit agreement. I think where we hit the disagreement is where you say, okay, we need to penalize these companies for buying up the single-family homes.
No.
But I really don't think that that's really the issue.
Well, no, we need to do away with the ability for them to get that easy money and buy up the single-family homes. And honestly, one of the biggest issues, I think part of the reason why, or the main reason why the Obama administration went along with this whole quantitative easing policy is because whether you're talking about Democrats or Republicans, both parties have been captured by those corporate interests thanks to unlimited campaign donations into political action committees, thanks to the fact that our politicians can be personally invested in individual stocks. We need to reform the system. It's not necessarily about punishing Wall Street. It's about getting to the root of the problem, which is the corrupt influence that Wall Street has on our politicians, thanks to how the system is set up.
I don't disagree with any of that particularly, but I would say that there's one additional element that I actually think looms far larger, and that is the political interest in Washington is always going to be in control, and Keynesian economics suggests that the easiest way to avoid blowback for a stagnating economy is to pump money into it. And so if you are in Washington, you're never going to be the president who says, we need to radically increase the interest rates. Right? The interest rates are not meeting with what the actual risk level is in American society. Right now, Biden's taking the heat for it. The reality is that the notion that the Federal Reserve, every president is going to have an interest in pumping money into the system. The more money you pump into the system, the more you inflate the GDP. The more you inflate the GDP, the more people have the impression that things are going splendidly.
True.
The more easy money there is in the system, the more that you do have corporate interests who are backing. All of that's true. But that starts with the amount of control that can be exercised by Washington, which is why, and this is where we'll disagree, I think that Washington should be stripped and castrated, and most of its power should be taken away.
Okay, Ben, this is not the Pornhub search bar. Calm down.
Local level I can do with my friends. Anna, thank you so much for stopping by. It's really been a pleasure, and hope we can do it again in the future.
Thank you. I really appreciated it and enjoyed it.
That's a lot of fun.
All right, then. All right, chat, what do you guys think about that? Would love to know your thoughts on this. I personally, I don't know, it's just like an Anna thing. Anna's quite the lib, as unfortunate as it is. And it really showed in this debate. Anna is quite the well-off California lib. She really is. I did not like it. I personally I didn't like it. I thought that by hearing people talk about it, I thought Anna went super hard. I thought Anna kind of bodied them. I feel like they spent more time agreeing than disagreeing on a bunch of stuff. And the disagreements between them were pretty, I don't know. I don't like it. Bad. But okay then. Interesting. Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there. If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button. If you don't, it'll make Boo very sad. I know a bunch of you who are watching are not subscribed. Join the frenzy. You won't regret it. Thank you, Boo.